Chapter 296. The Tianji Inn was the pride of the people in Tantai City. Therefore, when someone criticized the inn, many guests who were eating in the inn immediately raised their heads angrily and looked toward the direction of the voice. With a single glance, many people who wanted to reprimand him immediately gave up. Even the noise in the hall became much quieter. Instead, it was replaced by endless whispers. It turns out to be her. No wonder, since the Tianji Inn was given to the fourth prince by His Majesty, Tut-Tut. While they were talking, Su Li had settled the account. Then she turned her head, and her indifferent eyes fell on the woman with heavy makeup who was very fancy. The woman looked about 30 years old, and her appearance was very ordinary. Coupled with the greasy makeup, she was even more annoying. However, judging from the jewelry on her head, she should be from a wealthy family. Moreover, Su Li glanced at the faint fear of the guests in the inn, and she had a vague guess in her heart. At this time, the woman with heavy makeup saw Su Li's delicate and small face, and a touch of jealousy appeared in her eyes. She immediately sneered and scolded. "Hey, where does this little vixen come from? Aren't you afraid that you can't stand so many men when you go out?" As soon as the words came out, Fang Yuan's face instantly became cold. His palm touched the hilt of the sword. When he was about to take action, he was stopped by a small movement of Su Li. However, Su Li stopped Fang Yuan, but failed to stop Chu Qingning's mouth. Seeing that the woman insulted Su Li, Chu Qingning was immediately angry. He pointed at the nose of the woman with heavy makeup and scolded, "Where does this ugly woman come from? Not only does she have a donkey face, but her mouth is also so stinky. You should see clearly that this is the Tianji Inn, a place to eat. If you can't help but want to spit shit, go to the latrine quickly. Don't be disgusting." Chu Qingning was so eloquent that the woman with heavy makeup didn't have a chance to interrupt his smooth scolding. When she came to her sense and understood the meaning of Chu Qingning's words, she was so angry that her face turned green. You, how dare you? Do you know who I am? How dare you talk to me like this?" Seeing that the woman with heavy makeup was so angry that she couldn't speak clearly, many people in the inn secretly held back their laughter and felt very happy. At the same time, they cast a pitiful look at Su Li and others. This round of scolding was satisfying, but this woman was not easy to deal with. The group of young people was going to be out of luck. "How would I know who you are? There's nothing written on your face." Chu Qingning rolled his eyes and had no scruples. It was Su Li who stood behind him. He didn't need to be afraid of a nobody. After the incident of Nanjiang Country, Su Li's strength had risen to the level of a sect or even a country. For example, an elephant could trample dozens of ants to death casually. How could it be interested in understanding what ants were thinking? You. The woman with heavy makeup trembled and her pretty face was pale. She pointed at Chu Qingning, who was busy and didn't say a complete sentence. She stamped her feet and screamed. He cursed angrily. "You bunch of trash. What are you waiting for? Capture him. I want him to know the price of offending me." Although the guards behind her didn't like the woman's orders, they still acted because of the orders from above. This action immediately shocked all the people in the inn who were watching the fun. Inborn realm. These guards turned out to be all strong practitioners of the inborn realm. No wonder the woman with heavy makeup was so confident. "Surrender, and I can make the decision to let you suffer less," the leading middle-aged guard said coldly, and his big palm containing the inborn genuine energy shrouded Su Li. He was experienced and could naturally see that the person in charge of this group was the girl of 16 or 17. But before this palm hit, a strong wind suddenly shot out from the second floor of the inn and forcibly dispersed the middle-aged guard's force. Sensing the extremely condensed genuine energy in the strong wind, the middle-aged guard's face changed slightly. He didn't dare to attack Su Li again and turned back to withdraw from the door of the inn. The other guards were not so lucky. They were hit by the strong wind and flew out of the door with a scream. Bang! The woman with heavy makeup didn't know what happened. Suddenly, a bright red palm print was thrown on her face. She was directly thrown to the ground. Immediately, half of her face swelled up at a speed visible to the naked eye. "Who hit me?" After being slapped in front of so many people, the woman with heavy makeup was stunned for a moment, and then she let out an extremely shrill howl. But before she could make a scene, a cold voice in her ear instantly woke her up, and she felt cold all over. You can't be seen in public. Get out of here. This voice was so familiar. It was that princess. Why was she here? The woman with heavy makeup was full of fear and no longer arrogant. She knelt down with a plop and kept kowtowing. I know I'm wrong. I'll get out now. I'll get out now, as she said. She gritted her teeth and actually hugged her legs and rolled out of the inn. She left with the guards of the inborn realm, as if there were ghosts chasing behind them. This series of changes happened in a very short time. The incident was over before everyone had time to react. Then, a shopkeeper who looked like a scholar suddenly came down from upstairs and stood in front of Suli. He said respectfully, This, princess. The two princes upstairs invite you to have a chat. Suli's eyes flashed and she immediately chuckled. Please lead the way. The shopkeeper was immediately flattered and said, Not at all. Your Highness, this way please. Someone in the lobby recognized the shopkeeper and immediately exclaimed in a low voice. It turned out that the shopkeeper also had a great background. No wonder he was not afraid of Hiluome. Second floor, Tianzi private room. Suli pushed the door and walked in with Feng Yuan. As for others, they were waiting outside. Although the private room was large, it would leave a bad impression on the people inside if they went in together. Passing through the empty hall, Suli lifted the silk curtain and came to the stairs on the second floor. Finally, she saw two people sitting on both sides of the round mahogany table, a man and a woman. The man was Tantayu, while the woman was unfamiliar. Her facial features were somewhat similar to Tantayu's. Her every move exuded elegance. Junior sister apprentice, it's really you. Seeing Suli coming in, Tantayu was surprised and said, Just now on the first floor, I couldn't see you clearly. I thought I was wrong. The woman looked at Suli with interest and didn't speak. Suli smiled sweetly and said, I haven't seen you for a long time. You are more elegant than before. You are the last apprentice of my master. Don't make fun of me. Although Tantayu said so, the more brilliant smile on his face revealed his inner thoughts. Feng Yuan saw that they were not hostile. After glancing at Tantayu, he left silently and stood outside the silk curtain like the most loyal guard. When Tantayu saw Feng Yuan's action, a touch of appreciation flashed in his eyes. Then he pulled Suli to sit down and said with a smile, I almost forgot to introduce you. This is my half-sister, Tantai Mingyue. She is the second eldest in the family. She saved you just now. Otherwise, you would be in danger. Although you brought a lot of people, in front of a warrior of the inborn realm, more people won't be an advantage. Suli smiled slightly and didn't explain. She said to the elegant woman, Thank you for saving me, second princess. Tantai Mingyue smiled and said with a smile in her eyes, Fourth brother, you are wrong. Even if I don't help you, your little junior sister apprentice will be fine. The cultivation of the one who spoke arrogantly just now is not lower than mine. Tantai Mingyue said and looked at Feng Yuan, who stood outside the curtain with only a silhouette. This person could follow Suli in, but the one who exposed his cultivation could only stand outside the door. This alone was enough to expose a lot of information. Before Chu Qingning revealed his pneuma, he was no different from the guards around Suli who exposed their cultivation at the late stage. Tantai Mingyue also thought that Suli couldn't deal with Hiluome, so she took action. But now, when Tantai Mingyue thought of the team of more than a dozen people, she couldn't help but be shocked. She couldn't help but have a ridiculous idea. Tantayu was slightly shocked when he heard it. The second sister's cultivation was the highest among the descendants of the royal family. She reached the inborn 8th hurdle. The guards around Suli could reach that level. Even if Dongfang Rue was powerful, it was impossible to win over such a young warrior of the late stage of the inborn realm. Junior sister apprentice, Tantayu hesitated and said. Suli smiled and nodded slightly, second princess, you really have a good eye? Tantayu immediately didn't dare to speak. He also thought the same as Tantai Mingyue, and Suli didn't seem to deny it. By the way, senior fellow apprentice, is master still here? I have some important things to tell him. Suli changed the topic, and the stagnant atmosphere in the room immediately relaxed. Tantai was also one of the best princes in the royal family. He calmed down quickly and said with a smile, "Of course, but Master lives in the lonely mountain outside the city. It is very remote. If you find him by yourself, I am afraid that it will take a lot of time. I will take you there." Suli nodded and said, "Thank you, senior fellow apprentice. Don't mention it." Tantai shook his head and smiled. "You still regard me as an outsider as before. But it's good. I am in an awkward situation now. If you live in the prince's mansion, there will be trouble. You can stay in Tianjin. It is my property now. It doesn't matter how long you live." "Okay," Suli responded and turned away. She didn't ask more about the so-called awkward situation. After she left, Tantai Mingyue took a sip of wine and said, "Why don't you ask her for help? I can see that although this woman is not close to you, you are from the same sect after all. If the power in her hand can be used by you, your current predicament is nothing at all." Tantai smiled bitterly. "Second sister, things are not as simple as you think. I don't want junior sister apprentice to get involved in this mess." "Then you are willing to let me get involved in this mess?" Tantai Mingyue rolled her eyes. Tantai quickly apologized and toasted, which made her giggle. "Well, you are my dearest brother. Come on, drink with me again, and then you go to accompany your junior sister apprentice." Bang! There was a clear sound of wine glasses touching. Tantai Mingyue smiled and her eyes were meaningful. Silly brother. Although Suli looked simple as a woman, she could feel that this woman was absolutely not simple. Chapter 297. Soon after Suli left the room, Tantai followed her with people. As a prince of a country, although he was not the first crown prince, his status was still respected. There were many guards of the inborn realm following him. Even if none of them reached the inborn fifth hurdle, the young warriors of the inborn realm could follow them, which proved that they had potential. Tantai glanced at the large group of people behind Suli and hesitated. "Junior sister apprentice, the machine-operated dragon vehicle is not big. With so many people, I'm afraid." Suli smiled and motioned him to be calm. She whispered in Fang Yuan's ear. Then Chu Qingning and others immediately left with the waiter, leaving only Fang Yuan and Yunyi. Tantai breathed a sigh of relief and said with a smile, "It's much more convenient. Junior sister apprentice, don't worry. I will take care of your safety here. I will never let you get hurt." Suli nodded with a sweet smile and nodded obediently. "Of course, I believe you." "Okay." Tantai laughed heartily, and then took Suli and others to the machine-operated dragon vehicle. It was a machine-operated beast with a height of 1.5 people, 3 meters long and 1 meter wide. The whole surface was covered with cyan scales, and a pair of dragon eyes were bright as if it were a living creature. Seeing such a majestic vehicle, Yun-Yi, who was behind Suli, couldn't help but exclaim, "Is this the machine-operated dragon vehicle behind you?" "Yes." Tantai was always modest and polite, showing a little pride on his face. "This is one of the symbols of Tianji. Only when you come to Tantai City in person and are received by the royal family can you see it." At the moment of talking, everyone had already boarded the machine-operated dragon vehicle. The dragon vehicle made a low roar and went out of the city with a beautiful arc like a swimming dragon. In this season, Tantai City was very hot. Many ice cages were placed in the dragon vehicle, which was quiet and cool. Through the glass mirror of the dragon vehicle, Suli could clearly see the bustling scene outside the city. She had never been to Tianji City in the previous life. Now she saw such a magical machine-operated dragon vehicle for the first time. She couldn't help but be slightly surprised and sighed. "Senior fellow apprentice, the dragon vehicle is really extraordinary. It is much more comfortable than the carriage. It would be good if such a vehicle could be introduced into Dahan country." Tantai shook his head helplessly and said with a smile, "Junior sister apprentice, you are not the only one who has this idea. Everyone who comes to Tianji country will have the same idea. Even we often imagine the interests represented by the machine-operated dragon carriage. But the manufacturing method of the machine-operated dragon carriage is the top secret of our royal family. Only Father knows it. And I don't know why Father forbids the machine-operated dragon carriage to enter other countries." "I see." When Suli nodded, her psychic awareness had quietly invaded the core of the dragon carriage. In her opinion, It was easy for any practitioner of the longevity realm to figure out the structure of the dragon carriage. But after so many years, why had no one spread the manufacturing method of the dragon carriage? After all, the resources represented by the dragon carriage were not a little bit. Even a practitioner in the longevity realm would be tempted. Only with enough resources could a practitioner cultivate faster. This was an unchanging truth since ancient times. When she reached the longevity realm, her psychic awareness had been transformed. Even the special materials that could weaken psychic awareness could not stop Su Li's exploration. In just a few seconds, Su Li's psychic awareness penetrated into the core structure of the hearse. All of a sudden, her eyes slightly narrowed, and her spiritual sense abruptly stopped. It's really weird. The last key place in the core structure was covered with a layer of faint gray fog. The power contained in the gray fog was not strong. If she broke through forcibly, the gray fog could not stop her. But just the thought of breaking through the gray fog in her heart made her feel uneasy. It seemed that as long as she broke through, something extremely bad would happen. After hesitating for a while, Su Li's psychic awareness circled around the gray fog and finally slowly withdrew. I can't afford to delay my current affairs. There is no need to make trouble. Her eyes flashed, and the idea of exploration immediately faded. On one side, Tantayu was busy introducing the customs of Tianji country to Su Li, and he did not notice her abnormality. Lonely Mountain was far from Tantai City. The dragon carriage traveled for half a day. It didn't arrive at the foot of Lonely Mountain until the evening. Tantayu took Su Li to a bamboo house built by the water in the mountain, but he didn't see Qi Xianqing. Did the master go fishing? Tantayu looked around, but he didn't see anyone. He couldn't help but wonder. I think the master has left here. Su Li wiped the table with her fingertips and immediately drew a clear line. The table has accumulated dust. I'm afraid that the master has left for more than a month. Tantayu's heart sank. A month ago, it was the time when he took over Tianjian. He was so busy. He didn't expect that the master had left silently. He frowned. Junior sister apprentice, you came to ask the master for help. What should we do? Seeing the apology between Tantayu's eyebrows, Su Li shook her head and said, It doesn't matter. The master left suddenly. It's not your fault. I will find another way. Tantayu was silent. He saw that Su Li was not happy, but he felt that the junior sister apprentice must be very disappointed in her heart, but she didn't show it. Thinking of the relationship between the junior sister apprentice and himself, he hesitated for a moment, gritted his teeth and said, Junior sister apprentice, I will take you to father. He must know where the master is. When she said that, Tantayu felt a trace of regret in his heart, but it was soon replaced by firmness. Su Li was slightly stunned and immediately reacted. She glanced at Fang Yuan and Yun Yi. The latter immediately understood and retreated. Until they couldn't hear Su Li and Tantayu's conversation, Yun Yi couldn't help but worry. What should we do? The miracle-working Dr. Qi is not here. It's hard for the mist to explain when she goes back. Fang Yuan smiled and said lightly, Now, do you still think that Su Li came here to treat Lingamo? Yun Yi was shocked and said, Isn't it? Fang Yuan looked at the two people who were talking in the mountain and said slowly, Her medical skills have long surpassed Qi Xianqing's. Among all the people, he was the first to follow Su Li, and only he knew some secrets. For example, in the early years, Su Li was good at poison, but Qi Xianqing knew nothing about it. Su Li's medical skills were not taught by Qi Xianqing. Yun Yi understood the implied meaning of Fang Yuan's words. He was shocked and lost the ability to speak for a while. When Fang Yuan was still guessing the real purpose of Su Li's coming to Tianji country, Tantayu told a secret of the imperial palace that even the ministers of Tianji country didn't know. In fact, father has been worried about my mother's strange disease over the years. When talking about his mother, Tantayu's eyes showed sadness. It turned out that Tantayu's mother, concubine Yin, was the most favored concubine of Emperor Tantai Feng of Tianji country. The empress was just a commodity sent by the ministers to stabilize the national conditions. If it weren't for considering the face of the imperial palace, Tantai Feng didn't even bother to go to the empress's bedchamber and stayed in concubine Yin's palace at other times. Therefore, as the children of concubine Yin, He and the second Princess Tantai Mingyue were favored by Tantai Feng. Later, concubine Yin contracted a strange disease and had been in a coma. Tantai Feng was abnormal and forbade any imperial doctor who treated concubine Yin to leak the news. Otherwise, he would be executed. Later, he secretly looked for famous doctors in the secular world and the martial arts circle to treat concubine Yin secretly. But after so many years, concubine Yin still didn't wake up. If it weren't because she was still breathing, Tantai you would think that his mother was dead. However, it was a little strange that for more than 10 years, Tantai Feng was getting older, but concubine Yin still maintained her young appearance. It seemed that time couldn't leave any trace on her. Now my identity is sensitive, so it's not easy to enter the imperial palace. But if I follow the secret line of father, I will definitely not be found by other princes. I think with my identity, I will be scolded by father at most. Tantai Yu pretended to be relaxed and said. Then he seemed to think of something. He didn't give Su Li a chance to refuse and quickly said, "It's not too late. Before my whereabouts are exposed to eldest brother, I will take you into the imperial palace." Seeing that he said so, Su Li could only swallow her refusal and nodded. "Thank you, senior fellow apprentice." She could easily cure Ling Mo's injury, but in order to come to Tianji country, she specially left an excuse so that Ling Mo's meridians would not be hindered in a month. The ultimate goal of her coming to Tianji country was to deal with Tianji country as she did with Nanjiang country within a month. But now, with the help of Tantai Yu, the time was immediately shortened by countless times. And according to Tantai Yu's words, Tantai Feng seemed to be a good father, which made her have other ideas. Maybe I don't need to use the spiritual realm this time. Thinking of this, Tantai Yu had returned home with everyone and rushed to the imperial palace overnight. The imperial palace's gate wall was vermilion, but one place was really dark. There were countless inborn seniors guarding around it. As soon as Tantai Yu's dragon carriage stopped, he received a lot of attention. After perceiving the pneuma of Su Li and Feng Yuan, the hidden eyes immediately became sharp. Tantai Yu got off the dragon carriage and walked quickly to the gate of the courtyard with a serious face. He whispered, "Junior sister apprentice is the last disciple of the master. Now she is better than the master. I bring her here, so I have some confidence." After this sentence, the gate did not respond. Tantai Yu frowned and could only say again, "Mammy, please make an exception. I can't hurt my mother." After this sentence, Su Li heard the breath in the door paused, and then after the sound of the door bolt being pulled, the courtyard gate finally opened, and an old woman with a wrinkled face came out. She glanced at Su Li and others, and a trace of anger flashed in her turbid eyes, but she didn't lose her temper. She glanced at Tantai Yu coldly, and the old voice sounded in his ear. "You, take care of yourself." Tantai Yu stopped breathing, nodded slightly, and quickly took Su Li into the courtyard. Just at the moment when they stepped into the courtyard, another dragon carriage galloped over. Before the dragon carriage stopped, Tantai Mingyue got off. Seeing that the courtyard gate had been slowly closed, the eagerness on her face immediately became extremely ugly. Chapter 298. When Tantai Mingyue was upset, a mighty general in black scale armor approached and asked in a deep voice, "Second princess, are you also here for the young female doctor?" When Tantai Mingyue saw him, a strange expression flashed across her brows, and she exclaimed, "Commander Su, why are you here?" Commander Su was silent for a moment and said, "Second princess, you are wrong. We have been guarding the queen all the time and never slacked off." Tantai Mingyue was completely surprised because Commander Su was not an ordinary commander of the Imperial Army, but the most elite underground force of her father. He was also the foundation of the Tantai family, the Black Scale Army. But now, Commander Su, who was supposed to protect the stability of the country, had been guarding her mother for more than 10 years. Didn't it mean that it was not the Empress but the Queen who was the mistress of the Tantai family? There was a trace of warmth in Tantai Mingyue's eyes. Although she knew that her father loved her mother deeply and sought medical treatment for her for more than 10 years, she did not expect that her father's affection for her mother could reach such a level. "Second princess, our duties are top secret. It is enough for only you, even your brother, to know this matter." As Commander Su spoke, he looked towards the courtyard doors that were still closed. His eyes turned cold. If I had met the fourth prince in the past, then perhaps I might have considered it. But now, if it weren't for the fact that he is the queen's own son, then his actions today are enough reason for me to act. Commander Su smiled coldly. Tantayu's purpose was obvious. He clearly used this line to let the girl enter the palace secretly. Tantayu's talent was far less than Tantai Mingyue's. He was more partial to Tantai Mingyue. Now he saw Tantayu's selfishness, which made him even more unhappy. Tantai Mingyue saw that Commander Su was so explicit, and her face was unnatural for a moment. After all, Tantayu was her closest brother. So, even if she was very unhappy with Su Li, she could only help her at this moment. "Commander Su, you've misunderstood me. Su Li is not ignorant and incompetent, but the last disciple of the miracle-working Dr. Qi. Her talent in the medical circle has been extraordinary since she was a child. Now many years have passed. Maybe she can surpass her master. My mother has been in a coma for so many years. I am afraid that my brother is anxious, so..." Dantai Mingyue's words were reasonable and well-founded. Finally, the coldness on Commander Su's face eased a little. He said slowly, "Since second princess said so, I will believe fourth prince this time." "Thank you, Commander Su." "Second princess, you're too polite." After exchanging some pleasantries, Tantai Mingyue glanced at the silent door. Her eyes flashed with helplessness, and then she walked away. If there was no sufficient reason, even she could not enter from this door. She wanted to stop them before Tantayu entered, but it was a pity that she was one step late. At this moment, in the black-walled courtyard, Su Li followed Tantayu alone and passed through heavy guards. Finally, they came to a bedchamber that exuded a faint fragrance of medicine. Fang Yuan and Yun Shan were stopped when they passed through heavy guards. "This is the place where my mother rests. Go in. Anyway, you have to pretend. Then I will take you to see my father." Tantayu transmitted the sound secretly. Su Li nodded gently. Without hesitation, she lifted the gauze curtain and stepped into the inner bedchamber. When the maid in the palace saw Su Li coming in alone, she couldn't help but look surprised. But she was obviously well-trained and didn't make any radical moves. She walked to Su Li with light steps and saluted. "Doctor, you have 2 hours for diagnosis and treatment. After that, I will clean the body of Her Highness." Su Li said softly, "You can leave. I can't allow outsiders to disturb my treatment." The maid saluted and left the inner hall without staying. In the past years, various miracle-working doctors who came to treat Her Highness made similar requests. She had long been used to it. After the maid left, the inner hall was completely quiet. Only the breeze through the window blew in the ears from time to time, making a slight sound. In the center of the inner hall, on the luxurious soft gauze bed, a woman in palace dress who looked no more than 27 or 28 years old was sleeping quietly. According to the calculation, concubine Yin was over 40 years old. Time really didn't leave any trace. Is it possible that she accidentally ate some youth-retaining spiritual fruit and fell asleep? Thinking of this, Su Li walked to the bed and gently put her fingertips on concubine Yin's wrist. In an instant, a strange feeling rose from the bottom of her heart. Su Li just closed her eyes and suddenly opened them. She was shocked. Clear. Unprecedentedly clear. She could actually sense all the changes in concubine Yin's body, from the bones to the tendons and even the sound of the blood flowing in the blood vessels. As long as she wanted to hear it, the sound would be immediately magnified. Why is it like this? I have recovered a lot of memory, but I have never seen her. Su Li was shocked and silent. As she thought, her perception had reached the awareness sea of concubine Yin. It was a boundless gray. A sense of oppression was transmitted into Su Li's body along the perception of her psychic awareness, which immediately made her feel unprecedented pressure. The power of suppression? Su Li's eyes were confused for a moment and suddenly said a word that she didn't understand. When this word came out of her mouth, she suddenly woke up and then frowned tightly. Her mind was in a mess. The power of suppression? It was strange and familiar. It was strange because she didn't have any joy about it in her memory, but familiar. Suli guessed that it was mostly the memory brought by the illusion. Did that secret method let me inherit a trace of the memory of reincarnation mirror? Suli's thoughts turned quickly, and she quickly figured out a lot of doubts. Then she looked at concubine Een in a different way. Suppression? What kind of existence needed the suppression of reincarnation mirror? The answer seemed to be obvious. Suli's heartbeat suddenly accelerated. Looking at the beautiful woman who breathed evenly and quietly on the bed, she was about to confirm her thoughts. Suddenly, a low and deep voice came from the hall. Outsider, you are right. Gu is not a native creature of the illusion. Who? The voice came so suddenly that it sounded in Suli's ears. Suli's pupils suddenly contracted, and she turned around abruptly. Suddenly, she saw a middle-aged man in a yellow robe with an unshaven beard standing not far behind her. Looking at the outline of his face, it was not difficult to see that he must have been an extremely handsome man when he was young. Suli saw the golden dragon embroidered on the yellow robe, and her eyes were slightly gloomy. After a moment of silence, she said, "Tanaifong?" The middle-aged man laughed when he heard the words, "In this life, you are the first one who dares to call my name directly. However, as the half-owner of Reincarnation Mirror, you are qualified." Su Li's eyes were gloomy, and she laughed at herself. "What kind of owner am I? Senior Tantai, don't laugh at me. At this time, you know to call me Senior. It seems that you have guessed my identity. Did Jing Xian tell you that?" The middle-aged man revealed a lot of secrets, which made Su Li more sure of his identity. She immediately nodded and said, "If I guessed right, you are one of the ancient existences in the illusion like the old ancestor of Shaoshan Palace?" Shaoshan Palace? When Tantai Feng heard these 3 words, he was stunned. He seemed to think of someone, and said with a faint smile, "That old thing dares to call himself a god? He really dares to say that." Su Li's heart moved when she heard the words of Tantai Feng. It seemed that he was very disdainful of the old ancestor of Shaoshan Palace. "Little girl, your situation seems to be very bad now, and it seems that you are coming for me. Why don't we make a deal?" Su Li raised her eyebrows and said respectfully, "I'd like to hear the details." Tanai Feng laughed, waved his hand to get 2 chairs, and asked Su Li to sit down. His eyes fell on concubine Een, and a touch of affection flashed on his face. "Use your authority as the half-owner to let my cultivation companion not be suppressed by the illusion. At least she can live normally in the illusion. I will agree to any request you have." When Su Li heard the words, she immediately weighed in her mind. When she just checked, she had already found that if she used the secret method to wake up concubine Een, it was just a matter of thinking, and the consumption of foundation was far less than fighting with others. However, since she saw an ancient existence, her mind immediately became active, and she was no longer satisfied with the previous goal. After thinking for a moment, Su Li raised her head and looked directly at Tanai Feng. "Senior, I agree to your request, and I want you to help me once when it is necessary." Tantai Feng's face darkened when he heard the words, and his smile faded a lot. "Little girl, do you really not know the price of us fighting in the illusion? Or are you sent by that old guy, Mirror Spirit, to show off?" With the change of Tantai Feng's mood, Su Li immediately felt a pressure. In her special state now, she actually sensed a trace of deep hatred from it. Chaotic thoughts flashed through her mind, and Su Li felt more and more suffocating pressure. She had to stop thinking and braced herself to say, "Senior, I don't understand what you mean. Isn't Mirror Spirit Jing Xian? You said she is a little girl, but why do you say she is an old guy? It seems that you really don't understand." Tantai Feng restrained a trace of breath in time, took a deep look at Su Li, and said, "Yes, you are just a remnant soul that is about to die. I'm afraid that the old guy doesn't even want to see you." Remnant soul? Su Li was silent. Yes, she couldn't return to the real world now, and she would dissipate at a certain moment. This was the soul with a trace of memory. But even so, she still wanted to find out what secrets were hidden in the reincarnation mirror. Tanai Feng saw this and couldn't help laughing. He finally put away the last trace of temptation inside. "Little girl, If the little girl Jing Xian is the real mirror spirit, how can she suppress so many ancient existences? She is just the agent chosen by the real mirror spirit on a whim. Su Li was shocked and blurted out, if the real mirror spirit loses interest, what will she do? Chapter 299. What answered Tantai Feng was silence. After the silence, a free and easy smile appeared on the girl's face. She said indifferently, since the outcome has been doomed, why should I waste time on myself? What I think now is just that they can have a better future. Looking at the girl in front of him, who was many years younger than him, showing calmness in the face of life and death, even Tantai Feng, who had lived for many years, couldn't help but show a stunned look. Then, a rare admiration appeared on his face, and he sighed. If you don't die, you will definitely be one of the leaders of this generation of Qingshui Circle. It's a pity that you ran into this monster. Tantai Feng didn't continue. Even if he had been impressed by Su Li in his heart, what was the use of saying more to a person who had no future? Su Li was silent. Was Qingshui Circle the name of the real world outside? In the memory of the outside world, she only knew Juzhou region. In her opinion, Juzhou region had more than 20 major cultivation sects and countless secular countries. It was already boundless. How big was Qingshui Circle? It must be the boundless beauty of mountains and rivers. Unfortunately, she had no chance to see it again. Sighing secretly, Su Li restrained her lost mood and looked up, saying, Senior, I agree to the deal you said. I only have one request. Can you lend me the power of Tianji country for 10 years? She didn't mention the matter of letting Tantai Feng take action. Although it was only a short contact, she had already understood that Tantai Feng was not a very difficult person to talk to. But her request just made him change his face, so the price of taking action must be unbearable for him. Although Tantai Feng tried his best to suppress it, she still sensed the suppression force that was more powerful than that of concubine Yin. Once she took action, it would lead to the backlash of the suppression force. Su Li guessed that Tantai Feng was likely to sleep forever like Yin Ge. Sure enough, when Tantai Feng heard that Su Li changed her request, he smiled without thinking. It's easy. Just take it. It doesn't matter if it's 10 or 20 years. It's not too late to take it back when you leave me. Tianji country was just a force he created for concubine Yin in order to comply with the rules of the illusion. Now Su Li could reduce the suppression force on Yin Gu, so Tianji country was naturally useless to him. After reaching an agreement, Su Li didn't hesitate and immediately took action. The process of dispelling the suppression force was very simple. In just 10 minutes, concubine Yin's pale face became ruddy at a speed visible to the naked eye. But it seemed that there was still some time before she woke up. Tantai Feng saw this change, and a faint excitement appeared in his eyes. Enough. Although the suppression force was only reduced by 20%, GE's strength is enough to resist the remaining 80%. Hearing this, Su Li finally breathed a sigh of relief. In this way, the matter of Tianji country was solved without bloodshed. After the excitement, Tantai Feng quickly regained his composure. At his realm, unless it was something that truly made him ecstatic, he would rarely show his emotions on his face. Su girl, I will lend you the power of Tianji country. But in order not to let the mirror spirit notice the strangeness, I will let you take over the throne, and then give him some instructions. What do you think? Chun Chun, I will lend you the power of Tianji country. But in order not to let the mirror spirit notice the strangeness, I will let you take over the throne, and then give some instructions to him. What do you think? Su Li nodded slightly and agreed. Senior, you are considerate. I have no objection. But when you give instructions to senior fellow apprentice you, can you help to hide it and let him lend his power to the Leanly building for the time being? However, since you asked me to do so, I will do it. Speaking of which, I have the idea of making Tantai you the crown prince. Your appearance saves me the time of hesitation. Su Li was slightly stunned when she heard the words. She thought for a moment and asked, because of Master Qi Xianqing? Tantai Feng shook his head. On the contrary, if it weren't for Qi Xianqing, I wouldn't have to hesitate. Speaking of this, Tantai Feng's slightly sharp eyes swept over Su Li. In the latter's doubt, he slowly said, Girl, This deal is fair for you. But for me, it is a bargain. I never owe anyone a favor in my life, so I advise you not to have anything to do with the people of Ghost Clan. Otherwise, the result will be more serious than death. Ghost Clan? Suli frowned. Perhaps it was because the existence of Tantai was too old. Every word he said contained a lot of information. She hadn't digested it, but a ghost clan that she had never heard of was involved. Ghost Clan. It is the evilest clan in the world and is hated by everyone in Qingshui Circle. They seem to be no different from the human clan, but each ghost clan has a very terrible special ability. As long as they grow up, even the supreme master of a circle can't do anything to them. Tantai Feng seemed to be lost in memory. He looked very serious, and then he said something shocking. Qi Xianqing. He is a ghost clan. Suli was slightly shocked, and she couldn't believe it. How could? Thinking of the contact with Qi Xianqing in this life, she didn't think that an old man at the peak of the inborn realm would be a formidable ghost clan in Tantai Feng's words. You don't need to panic too much. Qi Xianqing is just a lost ghost clan. He has been suppressed by the reincarnation mirror for too long, and his power is almost all lost. He has long forgotten who he is and how to use the talent of Ghost Clan. Now he only has an obsession. What obsession? In Suli's mind, Qi Xianqing's tired face of running around constantly these years, and there was a strange emotion in her heart for revival. Tantai Feng's expression was complicated. Although they were enemies, he couldn't help but feel sad for Qi Xianqing's death. I have personally investigated the Ghost Valley, and it has no connection with the Ghost Clan. Qi Xianqing has long forgotten what he wants to revive. Now he runs around for the Ghost Valley just because there is a word ghost in it. Suli was silent, and a sense of relief rose in her heart. Although she had more doubts after listening to Tantayu's words, she finally solved a puzzle. No matter in the previous life or this life, Qi Xianqing's age had long exceeded the limit, but he still lived well. It turned out that it was not because he took any elixir to prolong his life, but because he was an extremely transcendent existence. Even if time had worn away his memory, he still couldn't die. At the end of the night, there was a glimmer of light in the morning. Suli quietly left the imperial palace and met with Tantayu. Junior sister apprentice, are you okay? Tantayu didn't care about the surveillance of the surrounding imperial guards, and he nervously transmitted the sound in low voice. Father came suddenly, and I couldn't inform you. Hearing Tantayu's words of concern, Suli came back from her chaotic thoughts and temporarily restrained her thoughts. She shook her head and smiled. It doesn't matter. The attitude of the emperor is very kind, and the disease of concubine Yin. Speaking of this, Suli deliberately lengthened the tone. The surrounding black scale army heard it, and they all pricked up their ears and paid attention to the next words. Tantayu couldn't help but be surprised and said, Junior sister apprentice, do you really have a way to cure my mother? You know, even after the master entered the imperial palace, he left with a disappointed face, and there was no way to cure concubine Yin's disease. Did the junior sister apprentice really surpass the master's medical skills in just 2 years? Suli shook her head and smiled, and pretended to be shy. Senior fellow apprentice, what are you talking about? How can I cure concubine Yin with my little tricks? But I know that there is a person who can definitely do it, and that person happens to be in Tianji country. I think it won't take long for concubine Yin to wake up. Suli's words were not true, but with the existence of Tantai Feng, even if it was false, someone would believe it. Tantayu was immediately surprised and happy, and couldn't help but ask, Junior sister apprentice, who was the person you were talking about? Suli smiled slightly, and a light flashed in her eyes. She slowly said 3 words. Mr. Li, it was him. Tantayu couldn't help but be stunned. He went to Dahan country to participate in the auction last year, and certainly heard the name of this person. At that time, he was still guessing who had better medical skills between him and the master. He didn't expect that it would be confirmed so soon. Unfortunately, the master was not in Tianji country. Accompanied by Tantayu, Suli returned to Tianjin, but she didn't immediately return to Dahan country. She had already laid the groundwork, and the rest was to see Tantai Feng's action. However, Tianji country and Dahan country were very similar. One person's words were the law. It was believed that the news would spread in a few days. However, after waiting for 2 days, Suli didn't wait for the news that Tantai entered the East Palace, but she waited for an uninvited guest. Where is Suli? Take me there. Second princess, the fourth lord has ordered that you can't. Get out. I want to ask what the little bitch did to make the fourth brother end up like this. The noise outside came into her ears. Suli, who was meditating and practicing, trembled her eyelashes. She opened her eyes and saw Fong Yuan's eyes full of inquiry. Suli frowned slightly. Of course, she knew who the person was. It was Tantai Mingyue. From her tone, it seemed that senior fellow apprentice was in trouble. Could it be that Tantai Fong broke his promise? As this thought flashed in her mind, Suli's eyes flashed slightly. She opened her red lips slightly and said, "Bring her here." Fong Yuan opened the door without saying anything. But after a dozen breaths, he carried Tantai Mingyue, who was like a frightened rabbit, in the room like a chicken. From her reaction, Suli knew that Fong Yuan's method of bringing her here was certainly not very gentle. Seeing that she lost her elegance, Suli rubbed her eyebrows with a headache and said helplessly, "Who let you do it?" Fong Yuan looked at Tantai Mingyue coldly. He loosened his hand and threw her rudely to the ground. He looked dissatisfied. "She scolded you." He heard clearly that he called her little bitch just now. So, even if he knew that Suli asked him to invite Tantai Mingyue to come here, he couldn't help but do it. Tantai Mingyue knelt on the ground and heard Fong Yuan's words. She was angry, but her body shook more violently. Chapter 300. Who the hell are you? Tantai Mingyue looked at Suli, who was sitting at the table with a helpless expression. She suppressed the fear in her heart and asked, how could a princess of the secular country make a senior at the peak of the inborn realm willing to follow her? Moreover, she was a young inborn expert at the age of 20. Suli was really not simple as she thought when she met her for the first time. But she didn't expect that Suli's background could be so strong. It doesn't matter who I am. Suli looked back at Tantai Mingyue. Since Fong Yuan had exposed something, she didn't bother to continue to pretend. You should be glad that you have a good younger brother. Otherwise, based on what you said outside, even if I killed you, your father wouldn't have a single word of objection. Tantai Mingyue trembled, and the first thought was that Suli was scaring her. She was the favorite daughter of her father. How could she be afraid of Suli? But when she thought of Fong Yuan's cultivation, she didn't dare to say a word. Well, you don't have to be too afraid. Tell me what happened to senior fellow apprentice you? Seeing Tantai Mingyue couldn't help being scared, Suli gave up the idea of continuing to frighten her and asked aloud. After Suli mentioned it, Tantai Mingyue suddenly remembered the business. She didn't have time to be afraid and said quickly, Miss Su, fourth brother was taken away by Tantai Dong. You go to save him. Tantai Dong? Suli frowned, and Fong Yuan reminded her in time. It's the first prince. The woman who made trouble in the Tianji Inn was a chess piece in the hands of the first princess. During this time, Chu Qingning and others were not idle in the inn, and they had investigated a lot of information. Yes, Tantai Dong was unhappy because father gave the Tianji Inn to fourth brother. Tantai Mingyue continued, yesterday, I don't know how the news was leaked. He knew that fourth brother secretly entered the palace with the help of mother. He immediately detained fourth brother in the name of abuse of private power. Tantai Mingyue said anxiously, fourth brother was arrested this morning. It has been half a day. I don't know how he is now. Suli raised her eyebrows and looked at Fong Yuan. The latter immediately understood and turned away. Tantai Mingyue was confused. Before long, Chu Qingning and Fong Mu came in. Fong Mu glanced at Tantai Mingyue, who was still kneeling on the ground, and said, eldest brother has set off. The dragon car is downstairs. Then let's go. Suli got up and glanced at Tantai Mingyue, who was happy. Take her with you. Outside the first prince's residence, a dragon carriage stopped at the entrance. Immediately, the guards on both sides of the gate tensed up. Whoosh, the door of the dragon carriage opened, and a group of people led by Suli got off. Tantai Mingyue looked up and saw the words, First Prince's Mansion. She was relieved and couldn't help but step forward to enter the mansion, but was stopped by the guards on both sides. Second Princess. His First Highness said that the residence is under martial law and that unauthorized people are not allowed to enter. At this moment, Tantai Mingyue had recovered the imposing manner of a princess. When she heard the guard's words, her pretty face turned slightly cold, and she said coldly, "Presumptuous. This empress is a member of the imperial family, and this is the residence of my eldest imperial brother. How can I be regarded as an outsider? You are just a guard. Do you want to offend me?" When the guard heard the words, his face changed slightly, but he still did not step aside. Instead, he said, "Second Princess, if you're here for the fourth prince, you can go back now." His Highness the First Prince said that everything was a misunderstanding, and he had already let the fourth prince go. Now the first prince's mansion is under martial law, and it has nothing to do with the fourth prince. Tantai Mingyue was stunned when she heard the words. She looked slightly relaxed and hesitated for a while. She really wanted to go back to see whether the fourth brother really returned to the mansion. If the first brother let the fourth brother go, her unscrupulous behavior would inevitably aggravate the conflict. It was not a good strategy. At this moment, Su Li, who looked indifferent without any change, stood in front of her and faced the two guards. Tantai Mingyue was slightly stunned. She, who had been a master for many years, realized at this moment that this action would not change because of her thoughts. Whether the senior fellow apprentice has gone back or not, we will know when we go in. Su Li didn't look at the two guards. Her eyes seemed to see everything inside through the gate. Fang Yuan, open the gate. As soon as she finished speaking, the gate immediately made a loud sound and slowly opened inward. Fang Yuan's straight figure fell into the eyes of everyone and the two guards, who were completely stunned. Then he became furious. Who is so presumptuous? How dare you break into the first prince's mansion without permission? Fang Yuan seemed not to hear the words of the two guards. He walked directly out of the gate and said as if there was no one else, "I have found him. He is safe for the time being." Su Li's eyes darkened, and her eyebrows were full of anger. Safe for the time being? That meant he was injured? When the two guards heard Fang Yuan's words, their faces suddenly changed. When they were about to shout, they were slapped unconscious by Chu Qingning. After that, Chu Qingning did not forget to say, "You two little ants, who gave you the courage to chirp here?" After dealing with the two guards, Su Li and others filed in. Soon they were found by other patrolling guards and surrounded. A trace of impatience flashed across Su Li's face. She said lightly, "Rush in as fast as you can. Don't hold back." Hearing her words, Yun Yi and others, who had not fought before, immediately became excited. A group of more than a dozen people rushed into the crowd like wolves into a flock of sheep. For a moment, screams were constantly heard. In the blood rain, Su Li followed the guidance of Fang Yuan all the way to the depth of the courtyard. Her plain white clothes were not stained with blood at all. Tantai Mingyue stared blankly at Su Li's figure. She stood in the same place and felt cold all over. The girl's figure, which was originally delicate and lovely in her eyes, was as deep as an abyss at this moment. All of them are in the inborn realm? She turned her head and saw the one-sided battle scene. She was terrified. Who could expect that all the young men and women around Su Li had reached the inborn realm without exception, and none of them reached the inborn fifth hurdle? Su Li. Was she the legendary young lord of a sect in the spiritual circle? At the same time, endless regret spread in her heart. She couldn't figure out why Su Li directly rushed in when she came to ask for people. What should I do? She is so unscrupulous. Even my father will be furious and put all the blame on the fourth brother. The fourth brother is at a critical moment. Tanai Dong is worried that he can't find a chance to pull him down, but Su Li directly sends the opportunity to him. What is she thinking? Tantai Mingyue was so angry that she almost vomited blood. Even if Tantai Yu was rescued today, he would not be the emperor. No, I have to follow them. If Su Li directly kills Tanai Dong, won't my fourth brother be in trouble? Thinking of this, Tantai Mingyue anxiously followed. She had no doubt about whether Su Li dared to kill Tantai Dong. When Tantai Mingyue chased to the backyard, Su Li was already standing outside a courtyard. There were 9 inborn seniors recruited by the first prince to guard outside the courtyard. It was very lively, but now they were all beheaded, and their corpses lay quietly on the grass outside the courtyard. Therefore, it became a quiet courtyard. Tantai Mingyue followed Su Li and saw these corpses. She couldn't help but be frightened. She had a new understanding of Fong Yuan's cultivation. Su Li glanced at it and frowned slightly. Fong Yuan's hostility became heavier. Some of it was influenced by the last trip to Nanjiang, but most of it was probably because he was imitating, and the person he imitated was herself. Su Li thought about it, and a trace of bitterness appeared in her mouth. She asked herself honestly, and it seemed that she was not qualified to say that others were heavy with hostility. Just because of the accumulation of a lifetime, she could control the killing intent freely. The hostility was integrated into her bones and did not leak. But Fong Yuan just started. This was a sign of stepping into the evil circle. The evil circle is free and unfettered. Everything is according to the heart, but he seems to be controlled by the killing intent. It takes time to settle the understanding and eliminate the obsession. Unfortunately, I don't have so much time. Su Li sighed softly, pushed open the courtyard and stepped into it. Although Tantai Mingyue didn't know why she sighed, she didn't dare to ask more. She quickly followed in and whispered, "There is a senior beside Tantai Dong. Although he doesn't have much life, he is at the peak of the inborn realm. Should we wait for your protector Fong?" Before Tantai Mingyue finished her words, a figure suddenly flashed beside Su Li. Fong Yuan, who was in black without blood, had already appeared. Fong Yuan looked at Tantai Mingyue, who was stunned, and said expressionlessly, "I will lead the way." Su Li was silent for a moment. She took a deep look at Fong Yuan, who was extremely serious, and nodded gently. "Okay." Fong Yuan's eyes were slightly fixed, as if he had finally determined something. There was a trace of bitterness in his expressionless face. He didn't say anything and went straight inside. She sighed again. Tantai Mingyue was confused. She didn't know what the master and the servant were talking about, but she cared about Tantai now, so she immediately followed Fong Yuan in. The courtyard was very small and could be seen at a glance. In the middle of the courtyard, there was a high scaffold, which was stained with blood. Tantai was hanging on it, dying. Fourth brother. Tantai Mingyue was so angry that her eyes almost popped out. She no longer felt that what Su Li had done was too much. Endless anger rushed from her heart to her mind in an instant, burning up her reason. "Tantai Dong, you are courting death." "Ha ha ha ha, second sister, who are you talking about?" "I am your elder brother." Before Tantai Mingyue finished her words, laughter sounded from the house. Then the door of the house was opened, and a handsome young man in a golden robe walked out slowly. Behind him was a wrinkled old man in a gray robe with a stooped body. He occasionally leaked a trace of pneuma, which even shocked Fong Yuan, not to mention Tantai Mingyue. Long longevity realm? Tantai Mingyue's face was pale. She stared at the old man in gray who made her tremble. Even her father didn't have that kind of pneuma. She only felt it from the old minister of offerings of the Tantai family. Chapter 301. Let's go. Su Li, let's go quickly. The longevity realm is the divine realm. Even if you have more guards of the inborn realm, you can't stop him. Only in the palace, only the minister of the longevity realm in the palace can save us. Tantai Mingyue transmitted the sound in horror and stepped back quickly. She had no time to care about Tantai, who was still hanging on the scaffold. The reason under the fear told her that if she didn't go to the palace to find help, she couldn't save anyone. But before she walked a few steps, a ghostly figure suddenly appeared in front of the courtyard gate. It was the gray-clothed elder. Tantai Mingyue stopped and looked back. She was shocked when she saw Tantai Dong standing alone in the same place. When did he appear? She didn't even notice it at all. The gray-clothed elder didn't seem to know the situation outside. At this moment, he saw the corpses outside the courtyard in his psychic awareness. His face instantly turned cold. "Tantai Mingyue, you have such hidden power. You even killed all the seniors I recruited. If I hadn't broken through this time, I'm afraid I would have been killed by you." Hearing the elder's words, Tantai Dong's smile was slightly stiff. "Elder Hui, what did you say?" The gray-clothed elder raised his head and looked disrespectful. He said bluntly to Tantai Dong, "Your First Highness, all the diners I recruited for you were killed by your second sister. According to the previous agreement, you should know what to do, right?" As soon as the words came out, Tantai Mingyue was slightly stunned. Immediately, her eyes lit up with hope. She said, "Elder Sir, I don't know what the deal is between you and the first brother. As long as you are willing to work for my fourth brother, I am willing to pay double." Second sister, Tantai Dong, who was hesitant, couldn't help laughing angrily when he heard Tantai Mingyue poaching him in front of him. "What do you think Elder Hui is? You can't move him easily. You can't give him what he wants." Tantai Mingyue secretly glanced at Su Li, who had walked to the scaffold. She couldn't help but gnash her teeth. "Elder Hui, I believe that there is a way. What's more, you don't know me. How do you know that I can't give you what you want?" Upon hearing this, the gray-robed old man immediately smiled amiably. "Your Highness, although what you said makes some sense, it's still not enough. But your elder brother is right. What I want is half of the treasury of Tianji country and the core design of the dragon vehicle. Now do you still think you can give me double the price?" Hearing Elder Hui's words, Tantai Mingyue was completely shocked. She looked at Tantai Dong with a gloomy expression. "Unbelievably. Big brother, you actually—" "Shut up." Tantai Dong was full of anger. He suppressed Tantai Mingyue's voice and scolded, "If it was before, I only needed to pay the design drawings to sit on the throne. Now I have to pay half of the national treasury, all thanks to you. What qualifications do you have to lecture me?" Tantai Mingyue's body trembled slightly, not because of guilt, but because the nominal elder brother in front of her had been completely crazy for the throne. After all, Tantai Dong was in a high position. After taking a deep breath, he recovered his calmness. He first bowed to Elder Hui from a distance and said, "Don't worry, Elder Hui. As long as I can take charge of Tianji country, you will be the national master of Tianji country. All the requirements I promised before will be fulfilled." "Ah, that's good." The old man in gray nodded and smiled. Although he succeeded in breaking through by relying on the resources of the first prince, he obviously didn't take Tantai Dong seriously after breaking through. "Big brother, you are inviting a wolf into the house. Father will never allow you to do this." Tantai Mingyue still wanted to struggle. Tantai Dong just sneered and said softly, "For the sake of father, I can keep you and fourth brother alive, but others must be punished for treason. The injuries on you and fourth brother are also caused by them. Do you understand?" After saying this, Tantai Dongshin seemed to have made a decision, and his whole person became relaxed. He didn't believe that with the help of Elder Hui, other brothers could make any trouble. Even father would no longer ignore him and really treat him as a crown prince. Ding! A crisp sound interrupted Tantai Dong's dream. Everyone heard the sound and immediately saw Su Li, who had been ignored for a long time, gently put Tantai Yu on the ground. Elder Hui's pupils shrank, and he looked at the broken chain on the ground. He didn't hear any sound before. When did the chain break? Elder Hui was still hesitating whether to take action or not, but Tantai Dong was angry. He waved his hand to slap Su Li. "Where does this silly girl come from? You are courting death." Su Li slowly raised her eyes and looked calm. She saw the palm approaching quickly. Tantai Mingyue screamed in horror. Su Li hide. It was true that Su Li had a group of very strong fans, but she had never seen Su Li fight. Su Li's face had always been pale and delicate. She guessed that Su Li was at most in the acquired realm, while Tantai Dong had the cultivation of the inborn second hurdle. How could Su Li be his opponent? Seeing that Su Li was motionless as if she was scared silly, Tantai Dong laughed and moved faster. "Second sister, the helper you invited is still a little inexperienced. Little girl, remember to be more careful in the next life. Don't follow the wrong person. Go to hell." At the moment when the palm print came, an extremely fast sword light flashed in front of Su Li, and then there was one more person besides Su Li Fongyuan. Puff! A broken arm flew in the air, and blood sprayed. Su Li took a step back, just avoiding all the blood rain. "Ah! My arm. Tantai Dong held his right arm, which only had the upper arm, and made a very sad voice. It all happened so fast that people had no time to react. The battle was over before the smile on Elder Huey's face disappeared. First Highness. Elder Huey's face was gloomy. He rushed out, but he was stopped by another indifferent young man. Luo Yichin reached out and stroked the bloodless blade in his hand. His eyes were full of fighting intent. He said lightly, "Old guy, you can't go there yet. Ignorant boy, get out of here." Elder Hui was furious. His extraordinary momentum broke out completely from his old body. He and Tantai Dong were now bound together for good or bad. Tantai Dong's arm was cut off because of his carelessness. Tantai Dong couldn't have any mishap in the following days. Crack, crack. The horrible pressure was like a mountain, and Luo Yichin's bones made an unbearable sound. He stepped back a few steps, but just a few steps. Then the fighting intent in his eyes was more intense, and the long blade in his hand turned into a snow-white light. "Take this. You're courting death." Elder Hui was very anxious and tried his best to fight with Luo Yichin. In the blink of an eye, he had fought with Luo Yichin dozens of times. Luo Yichin's body was covered with countless scars, but his pneuma did not decline at all. Instead, the light of the blade in his hand became more dazzling. He blocked it? Tantai Mingyue stared at the two people who were raging in the courtyard. If her skin hadn't been hurt by the sharp wind of the blade, she would have thought that she was in a dream. Suddenly, she thought of something and looked at Su Li, who was firmly protected by Feng Yuan. Her eyes were full of deep fear. A man at the peak of the inborn realm, who could not be defeated by a practitioner of the longevity realm, also obeyed Su Li. She thought that she had known all about Su Li, but now she found that Su Li was like an abyss, and she could never see the depth. One end of the courtyard was fighting fiercely, but the momentum could not be passed to Su Li because it was all blocked by Feng Yuan. Su Li squatted down and felt the pulse for Tantai Yu. Then her eyebrows immediately relaxed. "It's just a skin injury. Although he fainted due to excessive blood loss, it's not a big deal." Su Li took out a healing elixir and stuffed it into Tantai Yu's mouth. Then her eyes fell on Tantai Dong, who was holding his broken arm. After Luo Yichin blocked Elder Hui, Tantai Dong immediately panicked. He completely lost his previous arrogance. Instead, he covered his mouth and did not dare to make a sound, for fear that he would disturb Su Li and lose his life. From time to time, he looked at the two people who were still fighting. Facing Feng Yuan's increasingly oppressive eyes, his forehead gradually broke into a cold sweat, and he was not confident enough to say, Who are you?" Elder Hui is the elder of Shaoshan Palace in the spiritual circle. He will definitely win. You'd better let me go, otherwise." Su Li raised her eyebrows and looked at Tantai Mingyue. She laughed and said, "The first prince of Tianji country only has such a state of mind?" Tantai Mingyue was speechless for a while. No one would perform well in the face of life and death. "I won't hurt your life." Su Li got up and no longer looked at Tantai Dong. "Your fate should be decided by your father himself." Although in her opinion, with Tantai Feng's vision, other people were dispensable except for concubine Yin, who had accompanied him for countless years. But in order to hide from the mirror spirit of reincarnation mirror, she should not do too much. After that, Su Li glanced at the battlefield, which was tilted to Elder Hui, and said softly, "In order to prove his strength, Luo Yichin has reached the limit. In addition, the old man has just broken through. After a battle, his genuine energy has been integrated, and his strength has increased by more than 20%. If you don't go, he will be killed." Feng Yuan nodded when he heard the words. He turned around and paused, saying, "I'll be back soon." Su Li smiled sweetly and did not speak. Tantai Mingyue heard Su Li's analysis and was confused, but she still heard that Su Li's grasp of the battle situation was still above Feng Yuan's. Could it be that Su Li was able to win over so many young seniors by her absolute eyesight? Tantai Mingyue was puzzled and still didn't think that Su Li had Xiangong. Seeing the situation in the field stabilized again, she couldn't help but worry and whispered, "Miss Su, why do I feel that the two of them are still no match for Elder Hui?" Chapter 302. Then, what should we do? Tantai Mingyue was more and more worried. Today's series of changes and shocks had made her completely lose the calmness that a royal princess should have. Tantai Dong, who was kneeling on the ground, heard the words and stared at the battle in the courtyard. Because of Su Li's words, he seemed to regain his hope. Bang, boom. The three people fought fiercely, and the genuine energy surged like a huge wave. The broken courtyard wall finally couldn't bear it and collapsed, revealing Chu Qingning and others who were rushing outside the wall. Su Li didn't care about anything else and stared at the development of the battle with her dark, starry eyes. This battle came at the right time for Fang Yuan and Luo Yichen. An ordinary practitioner who had just broken through the longevity realm gave them enough pressure. If they could comprehend something, with the support of her resources, they could cross the barriers soon and become real practitioners. As time went on slowly, Fang Yuan and Luo Yichen's genuine energy was about to be exhausted and their pneuma was weak. Although Elder Hui was disheveled and embarrassed, his pneuma was still strong and even more mellow than before. Under such circumstances, the two of them immediately seemed to be unable to resist. Ha 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 ha. Elder Hui gave a long roar, and the grievance on his face disappeared. He laughed ferociously and said, "You two little bastards, if I hadn't just broken through, how could I allow you to bully me like this? Now, I will let you taste the real power of the longevity realm." Boom. A destructive power burst out from Elder Hui, and everything around him was shaken into powder. Luo Yichen and Fang Yuan's expressions changed dramatically at the same time, and they retreated without saying a word. But they retreated quickly, while Elder Hui moved faster. In the blink of an eye, he was above them. His hands were like claws, and he grabbed at their heads. Danger! Retreat! Tantai Mingyue was so anxious that her voice changed. But Fang Yuan and Luo Yichen had reached the extreme speed, and it was impossible for them to retreat. In this split second, Su Li squinted her eyes and pointed to the distance, shooting out a starlight as fast as a strand of hair. Fast. Too fast. Even Tantai Mingyue only saw that Su Li made a meaningless movement and didn't see any genuine energy bursting out of her fingertips. At the same time, a sense of life and death crisis rose in Elder Hui's heart. Fear instantly magnified in his eyes. What is that? His mind was blank, and he couldn't care about Fang Yuan and Li Mu anymore. He tried his best to avoid it, but his mind was transmitted to his body. Before he could make any response, his eyebrows were penetrated. Everything came to an abrupt end. Thump! How can this be? This old man's everything has just begun. Elder Hui's body fell to the ground like a piece of leather. His turbid eyes were filled with disbelief. He only managed to say one sentence before he breathed his last. Phew! Su Li gently exhaled a mouthful of turbid air. She calmed down and felt it. Then she slightly raised her lips. This person's strength was even lower than Lin Yanqing's, so there was nothing to be happy about. What made her happy was that with the steady improvement of her cultivation, the consumption of her foundation was indeed less than before. If she could find a suitable balance point, she would be able to stay in the world for a longer time. If the old ancestor of Shaoshan Palace can't fight like Tantai Feng, then Shaoshan Palace is nothing to me. However, if I want to rest easy, I must fight with that person. Su Li's eyes flashed a touch of caution. She didn't know how long that person had lived and had endless means. She was not prepared enough. Su. Miss Su. A voice sounded in her ears, which pulled Su Li back to reality from her thoughts. She turned around and saw Tantai Mingyue. The latter was immediately like a frightened rabbit. Her face turned pale and her mouth opened and closed for a long time, but she couldn't say a complete sentence. She only saw that Su Li stretched out her hand and slowly pointed forward. Then the practitioner of the longevity realm who had transcended mortality and entered holiness died? If Fang Yuan and Luo Yichen were not still sitting on the messy floor and gasping, she even thought that the old ancestor of the longevity realm was fake, killing Elder Hui with one finger. Su Li, what is her cultivation? Tantai Mingyue couldn't help but quietly look at Su Li's side face. The girl in front of her looked harmless, but she was far from her imagination. Clean him up. Anyway, He is a practitioner of the longevity realm. Let him rest in peace. Su Li looked at the old man's empty wrist and said to Chu Qingning and others. Then she walked to Fang Yuan and Chu Qingning and handed out 2 elixirs. You did a good job. Recover and comprehend well. Break through as soon as possible. Fang Yuan took the elixir without hesitation and continued to meditate. He was determined and would not treat Su Li as an outsider. Luo Yichen hesitated for a moment and took the elixir. He whispered, "Thank you. I still have some private affairs to deal with in Tianji country." "I don't know," Su Li said with a faint smile. "Luo Yichen, have you forgotten who you are?" Luo Yichen's face changed slightly and he became silent. How could he forget that he had promised to work for Su Li for 10 years? Now only 2 years had passed, and Su Li had invested so much in him that it was far more than his 10 years of loyalty. Now he proposed to act alone. Even he himself felt that it was very inappropriate. He closed his eyes and recalled the humiliation he suffered in the past. He gritted his teeth and said, "Su Li, I know that I can't repay what I owe you in this life, but stop." Su Li interrupted Luo Yichen's words and smiled sweetly. "You seem to have misunderstood me. It's just a deal between you and me. I'm not interested in knowing what you're carrying, but just like I helped Chu Qingning and others, I will not stop you, and I will lend you my strength." Luo Yichen's body shook slightly and his face changed. His lips moved, but he didn't know what to say. A deal? Su Li had been talking about a deal, but what he saw was Su Li's unilateral contribution. Whether it was practicing resources or revenge for them, what did Su Li want? With your current strength, it's easy for you to deal with a secular force. It seems that the force you offended before is not a small one. Heal your injury first, and then take Chu Qingning and others with you. You should know that I don't need to be afraid of anyone except for a few people in this world. As for Fang Yuan, Su Li glanced at the indifferent young man who was still in meditation and said, "He is on the verge of breaking through. When he wakes up, it's up to him." Luo Yichen was silent for a long time and finally didn't refuse as before. He said very seriously, "No matter what your purpose is, as long as it's not related to Xiaohan, I will unconditionally execute your order." After that, he closed his eyes and continued to seize the time to heal. This sentence was a lifelong promise for him. The rest was needless to say. Su Li smiled slightly. All living beings in the illusion could not be real, and she was not the real herself. Luo Yichen's promise was very serious, and he made up his mind to follow it for the rest of his life. But it was just an illusion, so there was no need to care about it. "Miss, everything is ready." After a while, Yuni ran to report. Su Li looked at the yard that became clean except for the blood on the ground. She nodded and turned to Tantai Mingyue, who was absent-minded, and said, "I'll leave the rest of the mess to you. Is there any problem?" Tantai Mingyue came to her senses and nodded quickly. "Of course, it's up to you." After Su Li's rampage, the first prince's mansion had almost no decent fighting capacity, so it didn't take much effort for her to deal with it. "Your father will not investigate what happened today, and there will be an imperial edict in a few days. You'd better keep my matter to yourself and don't let anyone know it, especially Tantai." Su Li's indifferent eyes flashed a trace of sharpness, which made Tantai Mingyue's heart tremble slightly. She said, "As for the life of the first prince, when Tantai wakes up, it's up to him to decide." What happened later had nothing to do with Su Li. She returned to Tianjin and let the news that the first prince's mansion was attacked spread all over Tianji city. She practiced quietly, and with the constant consumption of foundation, her cultivation steadily improved. Less than 3 days later, an amazing news finally spread. It turns out that the first prince wanted to rebel and was suppressed by the fourth prince. I heard that the first prince's arm was cut off by the second princess, and he was already a useless person. Today, the imperial edict of the imperial palace has been issued. His Majesty appointed the fourth prince as the crown prince. Even if the first prince is still as powerful as before, he can't do anything after the fourth prince controls the hidden power of the Tantai family. Tut, who can think that the position of the crown prince is finally won by the fourth prince, who has the mildest temperament? There is no lack of help from concubine Yin, but I'm afraid that the fourth prince fought for more. His Highness also has a good sister. He just got the position of the Crown Prince firmly. Unless he doesn't want to be the Crown Prince himself, no one can pull him down. The officials in the imperial court were talking about it. At the same time, in the East Palace, Tantayu, who was wearing the Crown Prince robe, looked at the extremely exquisite scenery outside the East Palace with a confused face. What does Imperial Father mean by those words? Tantayu frowned tightly. After being caught by Tantaidong, he was beaten to a coma. He thought that everything was over. Unexpectedly, as soon as he woke up, he received the imperial edict to take over the position of the Crown Prince. After he recovered from his injury, he was secretly summoned by Father. Father's order made him even more surprised. Even if Mr. Li cured my mother, Father will not exaggerate to use all the power of the country for Mr. Li, right? And according to Father's words, my Crown Prince is appointed by Mr. Li, and Father also agreed? Tantayu was full of doubts. What he heard today almost exceeded the limit of the palace education he received for more than a decade. A hermit in Jianghu could influence the next master of Tianji country and even become the controller behind Tianji country. It was too exaggerated. Father, aren't you afraid that Tianji country and Tantai family will be destroyed by Mr. Li? Chapter 303. Let's not talk about the reaction of the palace first. Let's go back to the day when Luo Yichen left Tanai City. Chu Qingning and others followed Luo Yichen all the way and finally arrived at a provincial city before sunset. Tianji country, like Dahan country, implemented a provincial system. It was only a day's ride from Tantai City. It should be the nearest provincial city to the capital. Luoyue City? Chu Qingning pulled the reins and stopped the horse. He looked up and saw the 3 black stone characters modeled by wind and frost, but they could still be seen clearly. He said excitedly, "Brother Luo, is this your hometown?" Luo Yichen didn't seem to hear Chu Qingning's words. He looked at the ancient city under the setting sun and was lost in thought. He didn't answer. His indifferent face was the same as Fong Yuan's, but there was a touch of complexity. "Brother Luo?" Chu Qingning wanted to ask again, but he was pulled by Fong Mu. Fong Mu reminded him in a low voice, "Brother Chu, I think Brother Luo is very sad. Don't disturb him." Tut. Chu Qingning raised his eyebrows and couldn't help but mutter, "As a man, if you don't agree, just do it. Why are there so many twists and turns? Will your cultivation speed be faster if you do this?" Fong Mu almost laughed. In the past 2 years, Brother Chu had been struggling with the progress of cultivation. No matter how hard he tried to catch up, his cultivation was always slower than eldest brother and Brother Luo. It could only be said that fate made fools of people. When they talked in a low voice, Luo Yichen had taken back his sight and glanced at the notice board beside the city gate. One of the wanted posters was so rotten that its face couldn't be seen clearly. After a moment of silence, he finally said, "Let's enter the city. Let's go. Brother Luo, don't think so much. We have Suli. What else do you need to worry about? It's really tiring to run all the way. Let's find an inn to have a rest first." Chu Qingning handed the horse to Fong Mu, took Luo Yichen's arm, and walked to the city. Being disturbed by him, Luo Yichen's annoyance dissipated a lot. He immediately smiled bitterly and let Chu Qingning take him into the city. "Brother Chu is really good at ordering people," Fong Mu said in a low voice after they went far away. Then he handed the horse to Yun Yi and ran to the notice board. He looked at it for a long time, but couldn't see the appearance of the person on the wanted poster that Luo Yichen had just seen. Forget it. Anyway, I'm sure I'll know a lot about Brother Luo's past. I'm not in a hurry. Fong Mu clapped his hands and quickly entered the city, leaving Yun Yi, who was holding 4 horses helplessly. This group of people that Miss has recruited are indeed dragons and phoenixes among men, but their temperaments are really— Yun Yi shook his head. He handed all the horses to the other cloud guards and followed them. He was not slacking off. The people in front of him were penniless. If he didn't catch up with them, he might make a fool of himself when he arrived at the inn. Although Luoyue City was not as prosperous as Tantai City, it was not a desolate place. Under the arrangement of Yun Yi, they soon stayed in a very good inn. After putting their luggage, a group of 13 people went downstairs and found 3 tables to sit down. The food had not been served yet. Chu Qingning didn't need to listen very much to know what had happened in the city recently from the discussions of the diners around him. A fat man weighing 150 kilograms crushed his wife to death when he got married, and he also got into a lawsuit? Oh my God. Wow. The poor scholar was kept by the rich woman of the cloth workshop because of his face? Being handsome means that you can do whatever you want. Fortunately, this young master's looks are not bad either. Chu Qingning sighed narcissistically while listening. His voice was so loud that it attracted the attention of the diners around him. The cloud guards, who had not had much contact with him, were embarrassed and chose to sit further away. Feng Mu and Yuni had already been used to it. They were thick-skinned because of Chu Qingning. They just waited for the food to be served and didn't care about anything else. After a while, the hot food was finally served. When Chu Qingning saw the food, he finally stopped talking to himself and started to eat and drink. Luo Yichin, who was relaxed after being disturbed by him, smiled slightly. He was about to enjoy the hometown food that he hadn't seen for many years, but the conversation from the next table made him completely stop. Hey, have you heard? It's about the Luo family. It's too slow for you to get the news. If it's your turn to say it, the miss of the Luo family may have been married. Speaking of the Luo family, it's really miserable. It was originally a good business family, and even a martial arts champion was about to come out. But because the young master took a fancy to Luo Yingying's beauty, the Luo family was ruined. Hush. You even dare to talk nonsense about that person. Don't you want to live? The scholar who was warned seemed to be unhappy when he heard the words. He straightened his neck and said, "What's the matter? She is dead. I just said it. Is it possible that something bad will happen?" Slurp. Chu Qingning drank a mouthful of soup and swallowed the food in his mouth. His eyes were slightly bright and he whispered, "Brother Luo, what the 2 people said just now, could it be?" Luo Yichin put down the chopsticks and the ease on his face disappeared. When he was about to get up, the door was suddenly kicked open, and then a group of servants in standard clothes came in. The fat servant who was the leader was dressed more delicately. He seemed to be a small leader. His fat face shook, and his mung bean eyes swept the field. Suddenly, his eyes fixed on the scholar who spoke before, and he said with a grim smile, "Boy, you dare to make rumors and make trouble in the territory of the He family. Do you want to die? Catch him and take him back to be punished." The scholar immediately panicked. He turned around and wanted to escape, but how could a scholar like him be a match for a martial artist? Soon, his face was pressed against the dishes on the table, and he couldn't move. The wine and dishes were scattered all over the floor. "Mercy, mercy. I just said it casually. I didn't mean it." The vague voice of the scholar came from the dishes. The strong man who pressed him saw it with cold eyes and exerted force. The scholar immediately screamed and couldn't speak. The rest of the diners were silent and gathered together in a panic, as if they could be safer in this way. The fat servant walked over with a complacent smile on his face, as if he was enjoying the fearful gazes. However, he was soon unable to smile, because there were actually 3 tables where the people were sitting calmly, not moving at all. Oh, I forgot to remind them that the people at these 3 tables are the same group. They are all foreigners. How can they know the background of the He family? The shopkeeper hid behind the counter and saw this scene. He complained in his heart. If they fought, his inn would suffer. The fat servant saw the grinning Chu Qingning at a glance. It was not because of anything else, but because the smile on Chu Qingning's face was too mean, which made him very angry. He was used to being domineering, except for the master, who dared to smile in front of him. He pointed at Chu Qingning and immediately ordered, "Where are the fools? How dare they continue to sit when they see me? Catch them all. If they resist, break their legs directly." The smile on Chu Qingning's face disappeared immediately. He stood up and was about to say something, but his arm was grabbed by a hand. He looked back and saw Luo Yichin, who was full of fear. He said to him, "The He family is the family of the current prime minister and the empress. Although Suli made a deal with the emperor and made Tantayu the crown prince, he was just the crown prince. If the contradiction between him and the He family was put on the surface, maybe Su Li's arrangement would be ruined because of him. So, even if Su Li told him to do it, he still hesitated and hesitated all the way. Chu Qingning immediately laughed and said, I wonder why you have a dead face all the way. It turns out that you didn't listen to Su Li's instructions at all. Instructions? Luo Yichen was confused. What did she say? The fat servant, who was standing at the side, heard the two of them talking back and forth, not taking him seriously at all. His face instantly turned green, and he immediately shouted in exasperation, What are you waiting for? Attack. Good timing. My hands are itchy. Chu Qingning laughed and immediately rushed into the servants like a tiger into a flock of sheep. His laughter echoed behind him. Xiaomu, you tell him. Fangmu saw that Chu Qingning was the first one and couldn't help but say anxiously, Brother Chu, leave too for me. I haven't had enough last time. After saying that, he didn't care about anything else and directly rushed into the crowd. The two of them attacked one after another, and each of their attacks hit the legs of the thugs. The sound of bones breaking rang out incessantly. The innkeeper and the group of diners were instantly stunned, and they even forgot to escape. Alas, she didn't leave any for me again. In the blink of an eye, the battle was coming to an end. Yuni sighed and smiled to Luo Yichen, who was stunned. Protector Luo, you don't have to worry about Miss at all. Before you came, Miss ordered that you can do whatever you want in Tianji country except for tearing down the imperial palace. Do whatever you want. Luo Yichen took a deep breath, and his heart was instantly filled with an inexplicable sense of heroism. How could he be so confident to say such words? I was wrong. Nanjiang country is like this. Tianji country is nothing, let alone a family in Tianji country. No matter how big the He family is, how can it be bigger than the Tantai family? Luo Yichen figured it out and was in a good mood. The knot in his heart in the past few days was instantly dispelled. When he was about to vent his anger, he found that the battle had already ended. The servants were wailing all over the ground. Without exception, their legs were broken. The fat servant was even more miserable. He was punched by Chu Qingning, and his third leg was also broken. Crack. Chu Qingning found a relatively intact stool and sat down. He took a long sigh of relief and said happily, It's cool. It's a pity that Tong didn't come with me, so no one can appreciate my heroism. Brother Chu, you did it on purpose, didn't you? Fang Mu came over with a bitter face and sat down gloomily. Every time he wanted to fight someone, there would always be a cheap back in front of him. Chu Qingning smiled and said, It's not good for children to fight and kill. I'm doing this for you. Do you understand? Fang Mu's face immediately darkened. Not to mention anything else, when he was in the spiritual circle, he had killed at least 800 warriors. It was not a big deal to steal people's lives. There was no need to talk about doing good deeds. Hiss you. Who are you? You dare to fight against my He family. You will regret it. Chapter 304. Regret? Chu Qingning raised his eyebrows and stepped on the fat servant's chest. He laughed and said, I have never regretted in my life. Can you show me regret? The fat servant was stepped on and vomited blood. He was terrified and wanted to escape with his hands. Madman, you are a madman. You dare to treat me like this. My family is not easy to deal with. You wait. Bang. Noisy. Chu Qingning impatiently slapped the fat servant unconscious. The rest of the servants saw that he was so miserable. They crawled and gathered together. They didn't dare to say a word, which was similar to those frightened diners just now. Finally, it's quiet. Chu Qingning glanced at the diners who had almost run away. He turned back and asked, Brother Luo, where are we going next? Luo Yichen's eyes narrowed slightly. He thought for a moment and said, Brother Chu, please deal with these people. Before we start, I want to go to my home first. Chu Qingning smiled and said, Hey, it's easy. You go home first. After we've dealt with these people, we can ask around and we'll be able to find you. Luo Yichen went out and took off a black cloth hat from Yunyi's horse. Then he disappeared in the street. Yuni glanced at the trembling innkeeper and put 3 golden leaves on the counter. He said lightly, "It's none of your business." When the innkeeper saw the golden leaves, his gray eyes immediately brightened. These 3 golden leaves were enough to buy 10 inns as big as his. With the money, he could completely change a place to make a comeback. Thinking of this, the innkeeper suppressed the fear in his heart and thanked Yun-E repeatedly. After dealing with the affairs of the inn, Yun-E walked to the backyard and saw a group of servants of the He family who had been tightly tied up. He nodded and said, "It's okay to leave them here for at least half a day. Let's go to the Luo family." When Chu Qingning heard this, he immediately shook his head and said, "Hey, don't worry. Let's have a drink here and leave in 2 hours. Luo Yichen obviously wants to go back alone. Isn't it inappropriate for us to go now?" Yuni was slightly stunned. Thinking of the situation when Luo Yichen left, he couldn't help sighing with emotion. "I didn't expect you to be so careful." Chu Qingning was unhappy when he was drinking. He said, "What are you talking about? I have always been so excellent, okay? It's just that Su Li and Feng Yuan have no chance to perform." Yuni couldn't help laughing. He also sat down, poured a glass of wine, and slowly tasted it. He didn't argue with Chu Qingning anymore. In the eastern part of Fallen Moon City, there was a house that looked a bit old. At this moment, the door to the courtyard was open, and lanterns and streamers could be seen everywhere. Servants and maids in new clothes came and went, as well as guests dressed in luxurious clothing. An old butler stood at the door, constantly nodding and bowing as he received guests. Although there was a smile on his face, it was even uglier than crying, and there was even helplessness between his brows. His eyes were gray and muddy, as if he had lost the spirit, energy, and spirit that he relied on to comfort himself. The guests seemed to be too lazy to bother with him and walked straight into the courtyard. Alas, the Mrs. Marriage will completely ruin this family. The old butler sighed deeply. Suddenly, he felt that the light in front of him dimmed. He looked up and saw a tall man in black in front of him. The man wore a black bamboo hat with a long sword on his waist, and his face couldn't be seen clearly. This child. Luo Yichen stared at the wrinkled old man in front of him and didn't answer. In the past 7 years, the hale and hearty Butler Wu in his memory had become so old. Butler Wu stared at him. Although the figure of the man in front of him was very strange, somehow he felt a sense of familiarity from the bottom of his heart. The first master? How could it be possible? The first master had passed away for 7 years. The miss was unwilling to set up a memorial tablet. She had asked people to look for him secretly these years, but they couldn't even find his shadow. If the first master was still alive, how could there be no news from him? Thinking of this, Butler Wu couldn't help but smile bitterly and asked, "Child, are you also here for the banquet?" Luo Yichen was excited, but the words were suddenly stuck in his throat. He couldn't say it. There was a rare trace of fear in his heart. In the hearts of the family, he might have died long ago. After all the troubles in those years were caused by him killing He Jinling in a rage. Now he suddenly appeared. What would the reaction of his parents and sister be? Would they be happy or resentful? Seeing that Luo Yichen didn't respond for a long time, Butler Wu only thought that he was a cold guest. He immediately made a gesture and reminded him, "Child, please take a seat. The banquet is about to begin. However, in order to avoid making others unhappy, you'd better take off the bamboo hat." Hearing this, Luo Yichen pulled the bamboo hat lower and said in a hoarse voice, "I won't go in." Which family does Luo Yingying marry? At this moment, he had made up his mind. If his sister married a good family and the family situation was also good, there was no need for him to break the rare peace. After getting rid of the He family, he could secretly support them and end the cause and effect. Butler Wu was stunned when he heard Luo Yichen's question. Immediately his expression changed. He murmured in surprise and doubt, "Child Fan hasn't given up yet?" No. Child Fan has long been under house arrest." Although there were many people at this moment, and Butler Wu's murmur was as low as a mosquito, Luo Yichen still heard it clearly. "Child Fan? Fan Tianqing?" Butler Wu was shocked when he heard it. His eyes lit up. Child Fan really sent you. Then he cautiously glanced at the courtyard. Seeing that the guests hadn't noticed them, he immediately pulled Luo-Ichin to the courtyard next door. Come with me. Luo-Ichin frowned and let Butler Wu pull him to a place with fewer people. Then he asked, what the hell is going on? Why is Tianqing under house arrest when Yingying is married? Butler Wu was nervous and didn't notice that Luo-Ichin called him intimately. He hurriedly said, since you are the helper invited by Child Fan, don't think so much. Take Miss away quickly. Go? Luo-Ichin stopped and said coldly, why? Where are you going? When Luo-Ichin stopped, Butler Wu, who was in a hurry, stopped abruptly. Hearing Luo-Ichin's tone, Butler Wu blamed the person invited by Child Fan for being unreliable. But he could only explain, after old master fell ill, Miss was the only backbone of the family. How could she get married? Father fell ill. 7 years had passed, and she was already 24 years old. For the sake of the family, she had never married. When Luo-Ichin heard the news, he was slightly shocked and his blood was boiling. This time, Miss was forced to get married by the He family. Child Fan was so angry that he wanted to save Mississippi. But before he could do it, he was under house arrest by the family. So, Miss had no choice but to agree to He family's request on the surface. In fact, she had been waiting for Child Fan to send someone to save her. Luo-Ichin took a deep breath. He family? He Jinling is dead. Is there any man in He family? Seeing that Luo-Ichin still had questions, Butler Wu was anxious and complained, oh, you are paid to do things. Just go with me. When did I say that Miss was going to marry He family? He family specially found a ruffian to humiliate Mississippi. If you don't go now, it will be too late after the banquet ends. It turned out to be like this. Luo-Ichin's expression changed immediately. He reached out to lift Butler Wu and rushed to the backyard as fast as lightning. Butler Wu rode on the cloud and dizzily saw the surrounding scene shaking. Then he arrived in front of Mrs. Yard. He couldn't help but be shocked and then overjoyed. Child Fan could invite such a master. Miss would be saved. At this moment, he was ecstatic, and he didn't feel strange that a stranger could be so familiar with the layout of Luo family. Yingying still lives here. Luo-Ichin stood still and put down Butler Wu. A trace of reminiscence flashed through his eyes. Then he pushed the door and walked into the yard. At this moment, he didn't hesitate anymore. Butler Wu happily walked to the door and laughed. Miss, Child Fan's people are here. Butler Wu, come in with that gentleman. As soon as he finished speaking, a female voice came from the room, which made Luo-Ichin slightly absent-minded. The voice was still the same, but the tone of speaking was completely different from 7 years ago. It was less naive and weak, but more strong and sophisticated. How did a 17-year-old girl support this family under the He family strife for 7 years? He couldn't imagine. Creak. The wooden door made a light sound. The person in the room came into view, which made Butler Wu and Luo-Ichin stunned at the same time. The girl sitting at the dressing table was wearing a phoenix crown and a red cape. Her makeup was exquisite, and she was extremely beautiful. But different from those delicate ladies, her lips were tightly closed, and her eyes were firm, as if she wouldn't change her expression even if a mountain collapsed in front of her. At this moment, Luo-Ichin actually saw the shadow of Su Li in her. Miss, why are you still wearing this? Didn't I prepare made clothes for you? Butler Wu was so anxious that his forehead was sweating. He rushed into the room to find made clothes for Luo Yingying to change into. Luo Yingying shook her head and stopped him. Her eyes were firm and calm. I won't leave. If I leave, He family will be angry. What about father? What about you? Then she looked at Luo-Ichin, who stood still at the door, and apologized. I'm so sorry to let you come here in vain. Please thank Child Fan for me. Thanks to his protection these years, our Luo family can continue to survive. But this time, Yingying can't hurt him no matter what. Although the Fan family was quite powerful, they were no match for the mighty He family, who was a relative of the emperor. The head of the Fan family, who had always doted on his son, had seen this, which was why he had ruthlessly imprisoned Fan Tianqing. Luo-Ichin was silent, and his body didn't move at all. Seeing that, Luo Yingying was confused and said again, Your Excellency? This time, there was finally a response. Luo Yichin moved. He slowly walked to the front of his mother's memorial tablet, which he saw at a glance when he entered the room. Under Luo Yingying's puzzled gaze, he silently burned an incense stick and finally said, "When did Mother die?" Chapter 305. Luo Yingying stared blankly at the back of the figure that was facing her. The more she looked at that tall and straight figure, the more familiar it became. Finally, it gradually overlapped with the youth in her memory. Was it him? Was it the one who had been dead for 7 years in her memory? Luo Yingying's eyes turned red instantly. She subconsciously took 2 steps forward and suddenly stopped. Her lips trembled. She pointed to the memorial tablet and asked again and again, What did you call her?" Alas, Luo Yichin sighed with mixed feelings under the black bamboo hat. He slowly turned around and took off the bamboo hat, trying to make himself smile more naturally. "Little sister, I'm back." Dong. The dagger hidden in the sleeve fell to the ground, making a dull sound. When she saw that angular and mature face, her first reaction wasn't joy. Instead, her beautiful face paled and she staggered backwards. "Be careful," Luo Yichin immediately whispered and flashed forward to hold her arms. As soon as they touched, Luo Yingying retracted her hands as if she got an electric shock. Then she seemed to realize something in the air. Just now, she seemed to have touched a real person. Was it not an illusion? Luo Yingying hesitated for a moment. Looking at Luo Yichin, who was confused and distressed in front of her, she seemed to summon up great courage. She bit her lips and slowly touched his cheek with her delicate palm. At that moment, a real and warm feeling spread through her entire body. Tears blurred her eyes, shattering all the strength she had put up. "I'm not dreaming. It's true, eldest brother. Eldest brother. Why didn't you come back for so many years? I thought you were dead. 7 years. 7 years." Luo Yingying hugged Luo Yichin tightly and buried her head in his chest. The whisper gradually turned into a heart-wrenching cry. All kinds of sufferings in the past 7 years broke out like a mountain torrent. Luo Yichin's eyes were red and his throat was choked. He could only let Luo Yingying hold him and couldn't say a word. Butler Wu, who stood aside for a long time, couldn't help crying when he saw the brother and sister repeating the same words. "God bless, young master is still alive. It's good that he's alive." Suddenly, Uncle Wu thought of something and his face changed. He didn't want to disturb the reunion of the two. He went up and said, "First, young master, miss, we can talk about it later. We can't stay here. Let's hurry up and escape." Luo Yingying raised her head with a start and also reacted. She hurriedly said, "Big brother, hurry up and hide. If the He family finds out that you're still alive, it'll be terrible. As for me," then she looked at Luo Yichin reluctantly with tears in her beautiful eyes. She gritted her teeth and said, "I appreciate your kindness, but I can't go." When Uncle Wu heard this, he sighed sorrowfully. He was about to say something when an exasperated scream suddenly came from outside the house. "None of you can leave." Before he finished his words, a large group of people rushed into the room aggressively. Luo Yichin actually knew the leader. It was he Luo Mei who made trouble in Tianjin before. "Sure. Luo Yichin, how dare you swagger back after being sent to the frontier? Do you think the law of Tianji country is just for show?" He Luo Mei sneered and waved her hand. She said, "Take him back and send him to the government office for punishment." He Luo Mei. Luo Yingying said with a cold face, "This is the Luo family. How can you mess around here? He is just a senior invited by child fan. I won't go with him. Why do you vent your anger on innocent people?" He Luo Mei seemed to have heard an extremely funny joke. She held her belly and laughed. After a long time, she was out of breath and mocked, "Miss Luo, do I look so easy to be deceived? Just now when I was outside, I heard it clearly. You called me Big Brother so intimately. I almost cried when I heard it. It turns out that you have already arrived." Luo Yingying looked solemn and stood in front of Luo Yichin to protect him. She said, If you want to catch my big brother, you have to step over my dead body. He Jinwei wants to humiliate me. If you kill me, I'm afraid it's not easy to explain. He Luomei snorted. Naive? Do you want to stop me? Go and control Luo Yingying first. After giving the order, He Luomei waited for a long time, but there was no movement behind her. Her face suddenly darkened. She turned around and scolded. What are you waiting for? Are you stupid? The middle-aged guard frowned and still didn't move. He Luomei was a shrew. She didn't recognize Luo Yichin, but it didn't mean that he had no impression. He remembered that when they were in the Tianjian, Luo Yichin stood very close to the young man. He thought that his status must be high, and he also heard that the girl had a close relationship with the fourth prince. No, now it should be the crown prince. Just when he was hesitating, He Luomei almost went crazy and scolded. How dare you? How dare you? A mere guard dares to disobey my orders. All of you, go. He doesn't want to live. Do you want to die with him? Hearing this, the other guards who were still listening to the middle-aged guard suddenly moved. Luo Yingying's face turned pale. Her cultivation was just in the acquired realm. She couldn't resist so many warriors of the inborn realm. Little sister, stand with Butler Wu. Don't run around. Suddenly, an extremely soft force dragged her to Butler Wu. Then she saw Luo Yichin's figure flashed out like a flickering light. The sword at his waist suddenly soared and crossed the void. Puff, puff, puff. There were 3 light sounds. The heads of the 3 guards who rushed in the front fell. Ah no. It's a senior. Retreat. The rest of the warriors of the inborn realm suddenly changed their faces and retreated quickly. But Luo Yichin, who was full of killing intent, wouldn't let them go. He snorted and floated to catch up with them. In the blink of an eye, he stopped in front of them and waved his sword. From the moment you decided to take action, you should be prepared to be killed. Now, go to hell. Luo Yichin looked indifferent. He pierced the chest of the nearest guard with his sword and cut off half of the cheek of another guard. It was like cutting melons and vegetables. He killed most of the guards in a short time. Run. Mercy, I won't work for he family anymore. Mercy. No matter how the rest begged, he only got a decisive sword in response. The middle-aged guard stood aside and even breathed carefully. He hoped that his existence could be minimized. He stared blankly at the one-sided massacre in the courtyard. He felt a chill run down his spine and cold sweat appeared on his forehead. This person was definitely an expert at the peak of the innate realm. If he had attacked just now, he would have become one of the corpses. That girl, who is she? The middle-aged guard was frightened and suddenly connected the recent events together. Not long after the girl came to Tantai City, the fourth prince was appointed as the crown prince. Intuition told him that this time he family absolutely provoked a monster that absolutely couldn't be provoked. After a quarter of an hour, the courtyard was silent. Except for the middle-aged guard who was wise to protect himself, and he Luomei who was scared, there were no living things. Eldest brother. Luo Yingying ran out of the house in panic. Looking at the hellish scene in the courtyard, her pretty face was paler than white paper. You killed people again, and so many people. Eldest young master, the He family will definitely not let this go. Take advantage of the fact that Luoyue City has not been sealed yet. You should quickly escape. Butler Wu was frightened, but he had rich life experience, so his reaction was much smaller than Luo Yingying's. He stepped forward to persuade him. Clang! Luo Yichin swung his long sword, and the blood dripped off the sword. It was as clear as a pool of water. He put the long sword into the sheath unhurriedly. After releasing his depression, his whole spirit had a slight change. He walked to his sister with a faint smile, touched her head, and said softly, Eldest brother is not the same as before. This time, no matter how many people you kill, nothing will happen. Luo Yingying shook her head desperately, and her voice was trembling with fear. Eldest brother, you don't understand at all. He family has become more powerful these years. You can't deal with them alone. Don't try to be brave anymore. Go. Luo Yichin was stunned, and then nodded. You're right. I haven't reached the longevity realm yet. With so many people, I may not be their opponents. But, speaking of this, Luo Yichen smiled lovingly. When did you say that you were fighting alone? Luo Yingying was stunned. But at this moment, a long laugh suddenly sounded from outside the courtyard. Ha 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 ha, brother Luo. I'm not late, am I? At the same time, a group of young people, who were about the same age as Luo Yingying's eldest brother, came in. The leader of the group was smiling, and it was obvious that he was an extroverted man. Eldest brother, these people, Luo Yingying said hesitantly. When Luo Yichen did not answer, Chu Qingning immediately said, Hey, this is little sister Yingying, right? She is really beautiful. I feel happy just by looking at her. If I marry her. Hey. Seeing Chu Qingning's excessive words, Luo Yingying blushed and looked up at Luo Yichen for help. Eldest brother. Luo Yichen's smile remained unchanged, and he said, These words must be your heartfelt words. I will definitely convey them to Miss Yin. Chu Qingning's face instantly darkened, and he quickly pulled Luo Yichen's sleeve. Brother, don't. You know that I just said it for fun. Don't let my wife hear what I said just now, or I will have no pocket money next month. Haha. Chu Qingning was so cowardly that Luo Yingying was immediately amused. She was relieved. It turned out that Chu Qingning's character was very interesting. However, when she thought of the He family, she couldn't help but worry. Fang Mu was careful, and he couldn't help but say with a smile, Miss Luo, don't worry. The He family can't do anything in front of our Linli building. Just wait and see. Although Luo Yingying was still worried in her heart, she couldn't show her worry on the surface. She could only nod. Chu Qingning knew what she was thinking at a glance, and immediately said to Luo Yichen, It seems that your depression is almost gone after the killing. Solve the matter first, and then come back to chat with your sister. Luo Yichen nodded slightly, and his eyes flashed with killing intent. Chapter 306. In the best part of the west of Luoyue City, there was a huge manor that occupied 70% of the area. The owner of this manor was undoubtedly the overlord of Luoyue City, the He family, which had many empresses and concubines. At this moment, in the originally peaceful manor, a large number of family guards and masters fell down in disorder. Only a small group of He family seniors were caught and driven to the front hall square. Not long after, a group of women from the He family who were hiding in the backyard also rushed over in a panic. Among them, the great imperial concubine, who had married the great prince, He Yulan, who was dressed in a red dress, was among them. He Yulan was pushed forward by Fang Mu indifferently. She slipped and fell in front of He Luan, the master of He family. He Luan was shocked and quickly stepped forward to support his daughter. He was so angry that he almost went crazy. He pointed at Fang Mu and shouted, How dare you? How dare you? In broad daylight, you dare to break into the Prime Minister's mansion and hurt the first princess. No matter who is behind you, don't think about leaving Tianji country alive. Chu Qingning clicked his tongue and played with the long knife. He shook his head and walked to the two of them, saying, Old guy, you really dare to say that? Aren't you afraid that we will kill you all and leave directly? He Luan's face was slightly pale, but his tone did not soften. He sneered, No, you dare not. Luoyue City is not far from Tantai City. If you really dare to do that, you will also die with me. Chu Qingning sneered, Master He, I advise you not to say too much. Be careful of retribution. Let's not talk about how useful your unfavored daughter of the Empress can be. Even your father is getting old now. I think the position of the Prime Minister should be changed to someone else. Nonsense. He Luan scolded without thinking. The national affairs of Tianji country are not decided by you, a young boy. Forget it. It's really boring to talk to an old fool. I'd better let the person who makes the decision today come and talk to you. Chu Qingning left with a smile. His words made He Luan's heart sink. If this person was not the person who made the decision, who made the decision? Although he was full of confidence just now, he was actually very confused and flustered. Just half a quarter of an hour ago, this group of young people came to fight without saying a word. The martial arts masters in the mansion who could fight against 10 people were as weak as paper in front of more than a dozen of them. They couldn't even resist one move at all, so they were all caught before they had time to escape into the tunnel. How terrifying would a force that could gather so many young experts together be? Of course, he didn't know that Suli trained these people to deal with the terrible forces with at least the longevity realm stationed in the future. To deal with a medium family in the secular world, it was like killing a chicken with a butcher's knife. Just when He Luan was thinking, Luo Yichin stood out from the crowd with his sister. All the He family's eyes immediately focused on them. When He Yulan saw Luo Yingying's familiar face, her expression immediately changed and she exclaimed, You aren't." In the middle of her words, her eyes fell on Luo Yichin's face, which was somewhat similar to Luo Yingying's. She suddenly thought of something and suddenly realized. Her face instantly became extremely ugly. "So it's you. Luo Yichin. You didn't die." He Luan was slightly shocked when he heard the words. He stared at Luo Yichin and said, "It's you, the bastard who killed Ling Er." A sneer appeared on Luo Yichin's indifferent face. He said coldly, "Why? Your son died, but I didn't. Are you very disappointed? You still have the face to show up in my He family?" He Yulan screamed, and her words were full of hatred. "My brother was young and handsome. If he hadn't died in your hands, he would have been a high-ranking official in the court. If it hadn't been for you, our He family wouldn't have had a descendant." Handsome? Huh. Luo Yichin seemed to have heard a joke, and the sarcasm on his face was more intense. Only the sixth miss of He family dares to say that. 7 years ago, although I was young, I was not a hot-blooded young man. It has nothing to do with me whether your idiot brother is a rotten man or not. Unfortunately, he should have the idea of my sister. Speaking of this, Luo Yichin looked cold. When my scapula was pierced, I could not exert half of the acquired 9th hurdle strength. You sent a senior of the inborn realm to cut the weeds and dig up the roots. Unfortunately, this kid's luck was really good, and he was lucky enough to escape with his life. Over the years, I dare not forget the great kindness of Master He. Today, I finally have a chance to repay it." He Luan finally couldn't help showing a trace of panic on his face when he heard the last words Luo Yichin. "Don't act recklessly. You have already committed a crime. If you regret now and let us go, it's not too late. If you do it, your Luo family will be finished, and your sister will also be implicated by you. You have to think clearly." It was true that He Luan's words were somewhat reasonable, but Luo Yichin was not the indecisive boy in those years. He didn't say a word, and the long sword was unsheathed. Swish, swish. 2 swords instantly pierced He Luan's shoulder scapula, and the extreme pain immediately made him scream. "Old guy, I haven't put the chain through it, and you start to scream? The pain that I was tortured by you in those years, now I give it back to you. Enjoy it." The screams echoed over the manor, mixed with the screams of fear of the women, which lasted for a long time. Chu Qingning sat in the shade of a tree, holding a watermelon and watching while eating. He didn't forget to touch Feng Mu next to him with his arm and said, "I say, the words that Luo Yichin said today are more than what he said in the past year. It seems that he was really tortured by this old guy." Feng Mu was dozing off and was woken up by Chu Qingning. He said helplessly, "I heard from Butler Wu that Brother Luo's mother missed him so much that she died during these years that he left. His father was also seriously ill and seemed to be dying. Only Luo Yingying was left in such a big family. If we came a little later, Luo Yingying would marry that ruffian. I guess that when Brother Luo came back, he would kill the whole He family without saying anything. You're considered lucky to be here today. Brother Luo is a little too talkative, and it's only human nature. Tut, I didn't know that your speed of collecting information is getting faster and faster." Chu Qingning stared at Feng Mu in surprise, and then stopped talking, quietly waiting for Luo Yichin to finish. Half a day later, it was evening. The setting sun was like blood, which made the bloodstains in the manor more magnificent. Luo Yichin put the long sword into the sheath, and his blood and qi lingered. He stared at the manor square that had been completely quiet, and a sense of relief and disappointment rose in his heart. The goal that had supported him to practice hard for a long time suddenly disappeared, and he would inevitably be confused. At this moment, Luo Yingying gently wrapped her arms around his shoulders, sending him a silent comfort. "Eldest brother, you have done enough. Let's go home." Hearing this, Luo Yichin smiled warmly and said, "Okay, let's go home." Chu Qingning, who was still cleaning up the mess, stood up and watched Luo Yichin leave from the gate of He family. Looking at the corpses in the square, he couldn't help but pout. Killing is addictive. It seems that after going back this time, both Wei and Luo Yichin should have a good rest. Feng Mu nodded gently, and at the same time, there were different thoughts in his mind. Their desire to kill skyrocketed. It seemed to have a greater relationship with Su Li. Since the morning of the rainstorm, Sister Su Li came back seriously injured, and her style of doing things has become more and more unscrupulous. Feng Mu sighed deeply, and then his eyes became firm. After the cause and effect were settled, as long as Sister Su Li said, they would execute it without hesitation. They didn't need to think about other things. This was also the only meaning of living in the second half of their lives. He believed that not only himself, but also his eldest brother, Brother Chu, and Brother Luo had the same idea as him. At this moment, Su Li, who was missed by Feng Mu, was in the East Palace of the Tianji country. However, she appeared in the identity of Mr. Li. As the night fell, the palace lanterns on the roadside were lit. The East Palace was brightly lit as if it were daytime. Su Li walked to the window and looked at the bright moon hanging high in the sky. She narrowed her eyes slightly. Tantayu followed her step by step with a helpless look. He didn't resist as he did when he met Mr. Li an hour ago. The reason that made him lose his resistance was very simple. One sentence was enough. The royal family of Nanjiang country is not willing to listen to my orders. I killed them all and replaced another family. If you don't want to be a sinner of the Tantai family, be obedient. After a long silence in the palace, Su Li retracted her gaze and looked at Tantayu, who pretended to be respectful and accompanied her. With her keen psychic sense, she could feel the unwillingness around Tantayu, which was as striking as a lighthouse in the dark. She smiled slightly and said, "Do you remember what I just said?" Tantayu immediately nodded and said in a deep voice, "I will try to improve the strength of the palace guards of sacrifice in a short period of time. Select 100,000 elite soldiers for intensive training and wait for your orders at any time." "I remember all these." "Very good." Su Li turned around and left a sentence. Then she left from the main hall of the East Palace. "If those people are used up, I will give them to you. If there are any left, I will give them to you. It won't be long before you become the real monarch of Tianji country. I don't have much time." Tantayu followed Su Li to the door of the main hall. Seeing Su Li's figure in his sight, he finally breathed a long sigh of relief. Although Mr. Li did not show any momentum from beginning to end, his back was already wet. "Brother, are you okay?" Tantai Mingyue came from the corner of the palace and said with a worried face, "You shouldn't resist that man. It's not bad for you to agree." "I know. I will bear it." Tantayu took a deep breath and said with bright eyes, "I will listen to him. He can destroy Nanjiang country, so he can destroy my Tianji country. There is no need for such a person to deceive me. Why should I sacrifice my future for a dying person?" Chapter 307. The next morning, Tantayu was pulled up from the bed by Tantai Mingyue when he was in a daze. "Second sister, what happened? Why are you in such a hurry?" There were two dark circles under Tantayu's eyes. He thought too much these days. He didn't fall asleep until the latter half of the night yesterday. He just slept for less than 4 hours. Tantai Mingyue didn't care so much. She held the crown prince's clothes and urged, "Get up." This morning, father suddenly announced that the empress was banished to the cold palace. "What? Tantai woke up and couldn't believe it. He Jinwei was banished to the cold palace? Tantai Mingyue nodded cautiously. I have been to the Chinkuan palace. It has been blocked by father. No one can see the situation inside. Didn't Prime Minister he protest? He Jinwei is his eldest granddaughter. Tantai was confused. In the past, his father tolerated He Jinwei because he was afraid of the He family. He even asked his mother to give up the position of the empress to He Jinwei. Why did he suddenly do it? Wasn't he afraid that the He family would rebel? Tantai Mingyue shook her head helplessly. I just got the news. How can I find out so much? But after the news came out, the He family hasn't done anything. A storm was coming. Tantai's heart sank. He put on his clothes and said seriously, I'm going to see father now. Okay. Tantai Mingyue responded heavily. That was why she came to Tantaiyu. Tantaiyu had a good relationship with Suli. If he went to ask, father would not refuse him. On the way, Tantai's heart was heavy. The He family was the most powerful family in Tianji country except for the royal family. The head of the family, He Tian, was over 70 years old. He was still in charge of the court. He was the prime minister of Tianji country. He Tian's eldest granddaughter, He Jinwei, became the empress of Tianji country under his operation. His youngest granddaughter, He Yulan, also became the first prince's imperial concubine. If there was no Suli, He Yulan would be the next empress. At that time, the whole harem would belong to the He family. All this time, imperial father did not make eldest brother the crown prince, most likely because he saw this point. He originally thought that imperial father would use soft policies to slowly weaken the He family's influence, and he would do the same in the future. He did not expect that everything would happen so suddenly. When he was thinking, the imperial study was in sight. Tantaiyu quickened his steps and walked to the door. When he was about to speak, the old eunuch guarding the door said in a sharp voice, Your Highness the Crown Prince, His Majesty has instructed that you can go in directly. This old servant reckons that His Majesty has been waiting for you. Tantaiyu was slightly surprised and immediately said, Thank you, Eunuch Qian. Your Highness is too polite. The old eunuch smiled until the wrinkles at the corners of his eyes became wrinkles. This was the future emperor, so how could he dare to be rash? His attitude was much more respectful than before. Tantaiyu entered the room and glanced around. He didn't see a palace maid except his father who was writing something at the desk. Secret talk? His heart tightened slightly. He walked to the open space in front of the table and respectfully bowed. This child greets imperial father. Dan Feng put down the pen in his hand and looked up to see his son kneeling down. He smiled indifferently. Lucky little guy, get up. Little guy? Tantaiyu stood up and straightened up. He was confused. His father used to call him Yu. Why did he change such a strange name today? Dan Feng saw his confusion but didn't explain. He just handed over the imperial edict just written in his hand. Take it. Arrange the rest as soon as possible. Tantaiyu was more confused. He took the imperial edict in a daze. He glanced at the content of the imperial edict inadvertently. His hands trembled, and he almost threw the imperial edict away. Abdication. His father actually decided to abdicate the throne to him 5 days later. Father, why do you? Tantaiyu was so anxious that his forehead sweated. He didn't know what to say for a while. Dan Feng chuckled and shook his head slowly. Little guy, don't be afraid. I know why you come to me. It's nothing more than the He family. Do you think that I compromised before because I was afraid that the He family would rebel? Isn't it? Tantaiyu was completely confused. If the middle-aged man in front of him didn't give him a very amiable feeling, he almost thought that his father was replaced by someone else. Of course not. After Tantai Feng finished speaking, he seemed to have thought of something and his expression turned cold. That kind of ant is not enough to enter my eyes. If it wasn't for Guer, why would I be so cowardly? But now, I have confirmed some things, so I have less to worry about. The existence of Jing Xin and Su Li's situation were enough to let him confirm that the real mirror spirit of the reincarnation mirror was sleeping. Even if he made a big movement, he would not be suppressed. So, He could move freely. Tantayu was stunned. He opened his mouth but didn't know what to say. He didn't understand a word of what his father said just now. Moreover, his father didn't seem to be as close to his children as before. He even didn't have the habit of calling himself emperor. He faintly felt that he knew a great secret, but his father didn't tell him in detail. He only saw the tip of the iceberg and couldn't know the whole picture. After struggling for a moment, Tantayu couldn't help but ask, "Father, why are you so strange today? You make me feel. Do I feel like an outsider?" Dan Feng Feng laughed, which made Tantayu change his expression slightly. "That's not what I mean." "That's what you mean." Dan Fengfeng's smile remained unchanged. "In fact, you little guys are outsiders. We old guys want to be outsiders, but we can't help it." After sighing slightly, Tantai Feng looked at Tantayu, who was more and more confused. He shook his head and smiled. "Boy, don't think too much. When the time comes, you will know something in the future. Now it's too early. In 2 days, your mother is about to wake up. At that time, I will make her the empress again, and then you will ascend the throne. You can do whatever you want in Tianji country. Your mother and I will enjoy life in the imperial harem. Unless the country is in danger, don't disturb us." Tantayu was overjoyed. He didn't find that Dan Feng Feng looked a little strange when he said "your mother." He responded repeatedly, "Mother is about to wake up? That's great. I'm going to prepare now." As he said, he was about to leave. When he walked to the door, he realized that he seemed to forget his original purpose after coming in. "Father." He turned his head. Before he said in detail, Tantai Feng said without raising his head, "Deal with the affairs of He family after you ascend the throne. You can find Commander Su for specific matters. He and the Black Scale Army will be yours in the future." Black Scale Army? The most mysterious and powerful men of sacrifice in Tantai family. Father actually decided to use the Black Scale Army. Tantayu was slightly shocked. His worries were swept away in an instant. "Yes, father." Not long after, Tantayu left the imperial study. As soon as he walked out of the imperial garden, he saw Commander Su with a serious face waiting silently in front of the palace gate. Commander Su immediately greeted him when he saw him. He saluted directly. "Your Royal Highness." Tantayu was in a trance for a moment. He remembered the disappointment and disdain on Commander Su's face when he took Su Li into the palace rashly. Today, it was a completely different scene. Tantayu didn't have time to sigh. He raised Commander Su's waist and said, "Commander Su, please stand up. I will rely on you and your Black Scale Army in the future." Commander Su's body was slightly stiff, but he still bent down. He said dryly, "You can't ignore the etiquette." Tantayu's cultivation couldn't stop Commander Su. He had to wait for Commander Su to finish the salute. Tantayu asked, "Commander Su, father has told me to deal with the affairs of He family. How is the situation now?" Commander Su was slightly serious when he heard the words. He stretched out his hand to dismiss the accompanying black scale guards behind him. Tantayu also dismissed all the eunuchs. In an instant, there were only 2 of them on the palace road. "Your Royal Highness, in fact, the affairs of He family are finished." Commander Su took a slight breath and said a fact that shocked Tantayu. "Why? Didn't Prime Minister He know how to resist?" Commander Su thought of what he saw yesterday. There was a hidden fear in his eyes. He explained in a low voice, "Your Royal Highness, you may not know. Just yesterday, all the influential people of He family disappeared mysteriously, including Queen Jinwei, who had been banished to the Cold Palace." "What did you say?" Tanayu opened his eyes wide and couldn't help but raise his voice. He Jinwei was banished to the Cold Palace. Anyway, she was his father's woman. How could she disappear casually? At this moment, Tantayu subconsciously thought of Mr. Li. Thinking of that person's great power, the shock on his face immediately faded a lot. "It seems that you have understood, Your Royal Highness," Commander Su said at the right time. "I heard that there is a person in the Linli building who has a deep grudge with the He family. After being valued by Mr. Li, he returned to the Tianji country and immediately killed the He family. The He family was wiped out before they could do anything. And then just yesterday, people of Linli Building took He Jinwei from the palace and He Tian, who was in the mansion of Tantian City. All the people in charge of the He family are gone, and the remaining people are like a group of dragons without a leader. They won't be able to stir up any waves. As long as your highness sends someone to clean up the mess, the great merit of killing the rebellious family will immediately be in your pocket. Commander Su's words were full of anger and expectation. Although he didn't have the right to choose his master, he also wanted to see whether the crown prince appointed by His Majesty and Mr. Li had the ability to ascend the throne. Tantayu closed his eyes and sighed softly. His heart was cold. In just half a month, all the changes flashed in front of him. Finally, he fixed his eyes on Su Li's smiling face. At this moment, even if he was slow, he should be aware that the suddenly clear road in front of him was mostly related to his junior sister apprentice. Although he didn't know what the relationship between Mr. Li and Su Li was, since it was his junior sister apprentice's intention, Tantayu's eyes flashed and his tone became overbearing for the first time. Chapter 308. When Tantayu dealt with the affairs of the He family, it was 3 days later. After returning to the East Palace, he knew that Su Li had left the day before yesterday. He got a letter from Su Li from Tantai Mingyue. What was written in the letter was simple. It was about taking care of herself. It didn't mention anything about the He family or his ascension to the throne. Tanayu wanted to ask her that year. Unfortunately, he was about to ascend to the throne. He had little time to sleep. How could he have time to go to Dahan country in person? As for the He family, except for some rumors that no one believed as a topic of conversation among the people, it had disappeared and became a taboo among the officials in the imperial court. A few days later, in the Ling Mansion, Yunjing City, Dahan country, Ling Imo, who was dressed as a servant, walked into the yard with breakfast. He turned around and saw Ling Li sitting under the eaves and looking at the distance silently. Compared with half a month ago, Ling Li was obviously much thinner. Ling Imo could feel the faint sense of irritation emanating from him from a distance. If the young madam doesn't come back, Ling Imo shook his head slightly. He handed the plate to Mammy Li, who was guarding beside him. He tightened the white ribbon on the hilt of the sword and slowly walked over. Seeing Ling Imo, Ling Li relaxed his eyebrows and restrained his irritation slightly. He glanced at the white ribbon and said slowly, "How is it going?" Ling Imo bowed his head slightly and said in a low voice, "The families of Lioi have settled down. Those who have no family members are buried together with the brothers who joined the cult with them." Ling Li nodded slightly and didn't feel sad. He had been accustomed to death for many years. Ling Imo hesitated a little and said, "The spy sent to Tianji country hasn't got the news of the young madam yet, but I heard that Tantayu was appointed as the crown prince. It won't be long before he becomes the next emperor of Tianji country." Tantayu? Ling Li narrowed his long and narrow eyes. He remembered that this person was Su Li's senior fellow apprentice, and he was very concerned about Su Li. Since he could be appointed as the crown prince, it showed that his power in Tianji country was very great. The possibility of Su Li encountering danger was very small. But it's been 16 days. Why didn't she send back any news? Are you going to stay in Tianji country and not come back? Ling Li muttered to himself. The more he said, the gloomier his face was. Even a trace of his pneuma leaked out and hit Ling Imo. Ling Mo's face suddenly turned pale, and he stepped back a dozen steps to stabilize his body. "Young master," Ling Imo shouted helplessly. He hadn't recovered from his injury, so he couldn't bear the torment. Ling Li came to his sense and saw Ling Mo's pale face. He apologized and said, "Yes, you can't use Xiangong yet. I'm sorry." Ling Imo shook his head. How could he care about such a little thing? At this time, Mammy Li came over and said, "Master, breakfast is ready." Come and eat. Don't worry about Mississippi. She has to treat Lord Lingamo. She will come back soon. She won't leave you alone. Yes, Lingli responded with a heavy heart. Lingamo pushed the wheelchair to send him to the table. He looked at the dishes on the table, but he had no appetite. He barely picked up a dish with chopsticks and put it in his mouth. He also felt bitter and difficult to swallow. When Suli said that she would leave for a month, he didn't feel anything. After all, he had been to the border of Nanjiang country for many days, so he didn't think it was difficult. But he didn't expect that going out to do things and waiting at home were two completely different concepts. Only after half a month, he felt that every day was like a year. Every day, he thought about the little things with Suli in the past half a year. He wanted to see Suli so much that he almost went crazy. Seeing that he didn't want to eat or drink, Xiaoming came over and said that he was lovesick. Then she put down the medicine given by the doctor and left with a smile covering her mouth. In Xiaoming's view, her son just happened to have indigestion. In the past 10 years, he had visited more than 1,000 brothels. Even if he married a beautiful woman now, he would never be a devoted person. According to what she had seen in these years, she would never think that her sons, who had visited brothels countless times, actually kept their chastity and didn't even give their virginity. At this moment, there was a sudden noise outside the east courtyard. Lingli raised his head and looked outside. He saw a beautiful figure that he missed so much suddenly stepped in. Li? Lingli was stunned, and then he couldn't help showing joy on his face. He stood up from the wheelchair and said, "You're back." Before Lingli finished his words, he was pressed by Su Li's shoulders and sat back in the wheelchair. Then Xiaoming followed him into the room in the next moment. Seeing that her daughter-in-law hugged her son as soon as she came back, and the couple got along well, Xiaoming was very happy. She smiled so happily that her eyes turned into crescent moons. "Li, you want to find a way to cure Lingamo these days, but Lingli was worried about you. He didn't have a good meal these days, and he lost a lot of weight." Xiaoming sat next to her and said a lot of good things about Lingli. Lingli's ears were red, and then she left contentedly. As soon as Xiaoming left, Lingli felt that the person in his arms left quickly. He couldn't help but feel a sense of loss. If he could, he would rather hold her like this and never let go of her forever. Unfortunately, he knew that everything was an illusion. Suli glanced at Mammy Li, and the latter immediately understood and left with the rest of the maids. Except for Lingli, only Lingamo was left. Suli sat down opposite the table and took out a bottle of elixir from her arms. She said, "After I went to Tianji country, I found that my master had left, but by chance, I found a suitable prescription. Lingamo, take this bottle of elixir. Take one every day and refine it. Your meridians will be healed after 7 days. At that time, you can gradually restore Xiangong. Don't be anxious." Lingmo's eyes brightened when he heard the words. He took the bottle respectfully and said, "Thank you for the elixir, madam." Suli nodded and looked back to Lingli. Under the expectant gaze of Lingli, she quietly finished her breakfast and left without saying a word. The smile on Lingli's face froze. After a long time, he slowly picked up the chopsticks and ate up every plate of breakfast that Suli had tasted. Lingamo held the elixir and watched those sweet snacks being stuffed into Lingli's mouth by Lingli. No matter how he looked at it, he felt that Master was eating Coptis chinensis. "Master," Lingamo said dryly. He hesitated for a long time and said awkwardly, "I think that Madam has been out for a long time. I'm afraid that she recalled a lot of the past, so she reverted to her old ways. She must have you in her heart. Master you. I know." Lingli put down the bowl and chopsticks and suddenly said. His eyes were full of calmness without the previous irritation. Then he smiled and said in a clear voice, "Lingamo, I know what you said. It's ridiculous that no matter how she treats me, as long as she is with me, as long as I can look at her, it's enough. I am very patient. If 1 year is not enough to heal the pain in her heart, then 2 years. If 2 years is not enough, then a lifetime. I have broken through to the longevity realm, and my lifespan has been increased by 200 years. Li has reached the peak of the acquired realm at a young age. She will certainly break through in the future. I can afford to wait. Feeling the strong faith in Master's words, Ling Mo's worries disappeared. He nodded heavily and said in his heart, I hope I can live to see the day when Master and Madam are back together. In the backyard, Mammy Li thoughtfully prepared hot water for Su Li to wash away her fatigue. Su Li's clothes were all taken off, and the steam was rising. She leaned back against the bath wall. Her thick and curly eyelashes trembled slightly. Then she opened her eyes, showing a touch of fatigue. The trip to Tianji country seemed to be easy, but it took a lot of effort to talk with the ancient existence. What's more, since she met Tan Ifeng for the first time, she contacted him many times. Every time she tested him, she fought with a strong man. After returning to Yunjing City, she really had a moment of relaxation. Clatter with a light sound of water. A white and delicate jade arm appeared in the water. Su Li looked down and was stunned for a moment. Then she slowly stabbed her wrist with her fingertips, and then nothing appeared. She tightened her lips, and there was a sense of hesitation in her eyes. But this hesitation only lasted for less than a breath, and then completely disappeared. What did the old beggar mean? Su Li gently breathed out a turbid breath, and her eyes became clear again. She thought for a moment. In fact, she returned to Yunjing City yesterday, but she stayed in the Linli building. After the matter of the Luo family was settled, Luo Yingying also followed Luo Yichen to join the Linli building. Luo Yichen's childhood friend, a young man named Fan Tianqing, also joined them. Su Li didn't pay too much attention to them. Her energy was not infinite. Now all her spirit was restrained by the reincarnation mirror and the life ring, and she had no time to care about other things. At her request, all the disciples in the Linli building showed their life rings last night. The number reached 90%, and the remaining 10% were the creatures in the illusion. Among the 90%, the distribution of the color of the life ring was also the same as that of the Nanjiang country. Most of them were light blue, and a few were dark blue. Chu Qingning, In Shuedong, Fang Mu, Luo Yichen, Mei Ruhan, and Fan Tianqing were all orange. Only Fang Yuan showed the same red as her in the past, but the color was very light, not as red as her blood. Su Li killed many people of the Luo family in Tianji country, and the people she brought back were all outsiders with life rings. If the space in the spiritual realm was not enough, she really didn't know where to lock these people up. After coming out of the spiritual realm, Su Li was very surprised to meet the old beggar who told her fortune many years ago. This time, the old beggar didn't pretend to be crazy, but just sighed, as if he felt sorry for her. If you capture and imprison outsiders so wantonly, the mirror spirit will notice it. Old man, I have already got the worst result. Even if the mirror spirit notices it, what can it do? At worst, I will die earlier. Little girl, what do you want to do? You appeared in front of me, and you should have guessed it. Chapter 309. The night was as cold as water. Under the silent night sky, the cold moonlight shone on the ground and reflected two long shadows. Useless. Su Li smiled sweetly and said, Old man, it has nothing to do with you whether what I do is useless or not. If you just want to say this, I'm sorry that I can't accompany you. The old beggar was slightly stunned. He seemed to be surprised that Su Li was still so rude to him after knowing some secrets. But he soon recovered and laughed. Little girl, you're right. I, an old beggar, can't control you. You can do whatever you want. Perhaps in the end, this old beggar will lend you a helping hand. Help me? Su Li raised her eyebrows and asked with a chuckle, Can you help me to deal with the old ancestor of the Shaoshan Palace? The old beggar's face immediately turned green. He was almost choked by Su Li. Then he turned around and slipped away. Little girl, remember, there are no absolutes in the world. If you can grasp the opportunity, you might be able to come back from the dead. Come back from the dead. Come back from the dead? Suli held a handful of warm bath water with one hand and frowned slightly. She murmured a few words and couldn't understand it. Her current situation was just as the old beggar said. It was a complete dead end. If she wanted to get a chance of survival, she must master a trace of the natural law. But the natural law was unfathomable. How could she find a trace of the law and master it? It didn't sound possible at all. A slight sigh echoed in the silent bathroom. After Suli came back, Lingli could finally calm down to deal with the affairs of the cult that piled up in the past half-month. But when he looked through the intelligence sent by the Tinya house every day, he became more and more suspicious. The Nanjiang country, which had frequent changes, suddenly became quiet and sent compensation materials and tributes to the frontier barracks. It seemed that they wanted to stop the war. Qinglan, do you know what's going on? Lingli handed the file to Ling Qinglan. Ling Qinglan rolled his eyes and didn't take it. He said, even if you care about Suli, you should at least take a look at the frontier intelligence sent every day. The news is out of date. Look at the latest. Then, Ling Qinglan took out another file from the table. Lingli took it and immediately opened it. He glanced at the contents. Suddenly, his face changed slightly and he was shocked. The monarch of Nanjiang country was changed? When did this happen? Ling Qinglan frowned and shook his head. He said, I don't know. The strength of the Lu family is weaker than that of the Wu family and the Ma family in Yunjing City. It is impossible for them to defeat the Wei family. Lingli said yes. According to the change of events, the change of the lord of Nanjiang country should coincide with the time when he went to save his second brother. I suspect that it was the Joyful Union sect who did it. Ling Qinglan waved the folding fan in his hand and said solemnly, a few days ago, the brothers lurking in the Lianshi cult sent back the news that the lord of the Lianshi cult suddenly took a group of elites and went deep into the mystery forbidden land. So far, there has been no news. The rest of the people in the Lianshi cult either left or dispersed. He's no longer a threat. The mystery forbidden land. Lingli thought for a while. He had heard of that dangerous place. Since the Lianshi cult went in, they couldn't come out in a short time. There was no need to worry about it. What he should pay attention to now was why the Lianshi cult ventured into the mystery forbidden land. It is impossible for the Haohuan sect to force the Lianshi cult to this extent. With the strength of the Haohuan sect, it is still not enough to bring down the Wei family. Lingli rubbed his eyebrows with a headache. He didn't pay attention to the intelligence for more than 10 days. He didn't expect that the situation in the world had changed beyond recognition. Investigate. First, investigate what happened in Tiangu City half a month ago. Send someone to secretly test the details of the Lu family. At the same time, pay close attention to the movements of the Haohuan sect. If it is the old Lord Yi who did it, it will not stop here. Ling Qinglan was shocked and nodded heavily. There was no omission in Ling Li's decision. With his order, the huge and tight machine of the Enma cult immediately ran. But the Haohuan sect seemed to disappear. No matter how Ling Li searched, he couldn't find any clues about the Haohuan sect. Ling Li had to give up helplessly. There was no war in the frontier, so he didn't need to be distracted by Ling Ping. He concentrated on dealing with the Dongfang family. With Suli by his side, time passed unconsciously. In a blink of an eye, another year passed. Mammy Li counted with her fingers. The miss and the son-in-law had been married for more than a year and a half. It had been 4 years since she rescued Suli from the wooden house outside the Desu town. Time really passed by quickly. Mammy Li sighed. Suddenly, she saw Chiu Ming leave the east courtyard with a worried face, followed by a doctor. Madam comes to urge again. It's no wonder. They have been married for so long. But there is no movement in the belly of the miss. If it were me, I would also be worried. Mammy Li muttered strangely and went back to the kitchen to prepare snacks. She had been with Suli for the longest time. Although she didn't learn much about the skills of the miss, the snacks she made were much more delicate than those of other cooks. Madame Dowager and Madame Dowager liked them the most. This year, there was not much change in the Dahan country. Although the health of the emperor was getting worse year by year, since the fifth prince was appointed as the crown prince, the domestic situation was much more stable than in previous years. As for the Tianji country and the Nanjiang country, they were naturally calm. The relationship between the three countries entered an unprecedented period of harmony. The Yinma cult took this opportunity to expand its strength. Both the Shuelo cult and the Tianya house had made great progress. They even completely covered the Nanjiang country and stepped into the territory of the Tianji country. In the true spirit realm, which was not connected to the mortal world, the situation in the inner realm had changed dramatically over the past year. First of all, the Ghost Valley, the second force only inferior to the Shaoshan Palace in the spiritual circle, suddenly announced the closure of the valley. All the disciples who were walking in the outside world also returned to the valley, and there was no sign of going out. Rumors were everywhere in the spiritual circle. Some people said that the Ghost Valley was suddenly destroyed by a mysterious, vengeful person. Some people said that the founder of the Ghost Valley returned to the valley to teach immortals, so that all the disciples were recalled. All kinds of rumors were more exaggerated than the other, and no one believed them. Soon after, the enthronement ceremony of the head of the Wanjian sect overshadowed the Ghost Valley. The name of head Wen Tingshan spread throughout the spiritual circle by holding a banquet for 3 days and 3 nights. At the same time, the wife of the head, Ning Qing, was pregnant. It could be said to be double happiness. Su Li asked Feng Yuan to send the congratulatory card, and she had been staying in the Ling mansion to practice. Finally, at a certain moment, Su Li opened her eyes, stopped running the xiangong, and stroked her slender wrist with her fingertips. Foundation, there are still 4,000. With a sigh of relief, Su Li got up, pushed the door open, and went out. The sunshine outside was quite dazzling, which made her squint. The scenery in the courtyard in front of the wing room was as lush as a year ago. The 4 words, extreme prosperity and then decline, appeared in Su Li's mind. Then she seemed to sense something, and her footsteps suddenly stopped. Raising her head, she didn't know when there was a figure beside the quiet courtyard wall. Vicissitudes, loneliness, ragged clothes, disheveled hair, and dirty face, like a lonely ghost. The familiar face full of wrinkles, at this moment, exuded a completely different gloomy pneuma. It was him, Qi Xianqing. Master. Su Li's pupils shrank slightly, and she called softly. Qi Xianqing immediately responded. His figure flashed to the front of Su Li. He stared at Su Li with his turbid old eyes and said nothing. At this moment, Mammy Li passed by the door and saw Su Li standing in the courtyard. She immediately smiled and said, "Hello, miss. You finally know to come out. Basking in the sun is good for your health." Su Li was slightly stunned. She glanced at Qi Xianqing, who was still staring at her, and then looked up at Mammy Li outside the courtyard door. From that angle, she should see Qi Xianqing's back. "Miss, what's wrong with you?" Mammy Li's voice interrupted her thinking. Su Li came to her sense and shook her head. "Nothing. I am thinking about something. You can go ahead." "Okay." Mammy Li didn't doubt her and disappeared outside the door. Su Li's sight returned to Qi Xianqing. After a long silence, she suddenly said, "Ghost Clan?" Qi Xianqing's eyes fluctuated. It seemed that he had no feet. He floated to the side of Su Li. His voice was hoarse. He was totally different from the gentle and elegant old doctor in those days. "You know Ghost Clan. Who told you?" "Tantai Feng." Su Li simply replied. She was more and more sure that her cheap master in front of her had already remembered his identity. Even if she lied, with his ability, he could soon find it out. "Haha, it turns out to be him." Qi Xianqing laughed wildly, and his eyes burst with unforgettable hatred. "He also had a part in destroying my Ghost Clan." Su Li was silent. Qi Xianqing was stunned. He suddenly showed a mocking expression on his face and kept laughing. "I forgot that you are also a human clan. Hee hee." Su Li slightly pursed her lips and slightly lowered her chin. "Senior, why do you come here? What did you call me?" When Qi Xianqing heard Su Li's words, he was immediately angry and asked angrily. Su Li's expression didn't change. She said in a deep voice, Just what?" Qi Xianqing interrupted Su Li and said gloomily, People of Ghost Clan, pay attention to single-mindedness. Since I have recognized you as my disciple, you have to be my disciple for a lifetime. You can't regret it. Did Ghost Clan have such a custom? Suli was speechless for a while and didn't know what to say. She had expected that if she solved the matter of Ghost Valley, Qi Xianqing would definitely come to her. But she didn't expect that it was Qi Xianqing who had recovered his memory. Last, take this thing. Qi Xianqing turned his palm and took out a quaint black ring from nowhere. Suli took it with doubt and looked at it a little. There was no pattern on the surface of the ring. The texture was a little rough, like a stone surface. Chapter 310. Suli was horrified. She reached out to take it off, but found that the ring seemed to grow out of her flesh. No matter how hard she tried, she couldn't pull it off. Seeing this scene, Qi Xianqing suddenly smiled with a sense of relief on his face, as if he had completed a very important mission. My apprentice, stop. As long as you put this ring on, there is no reason to take it off. Really? Suli looked up and her eyes were cold. She cut her ring finger like a knife without hesitation. Qi Xianqing didn't stop her and let Suli do it. At the moment when the sharp finger wind broke the surface skin of the ring finger, Suli's movement suddenly stagnated. She forcibly withdrew the force behind, and her expression was completely gloomy. In her eyes, the black lotus ring on the ring finger suddenly disappeared, and then appeared on the other 4 fingers. After flashing several times, it was fixed on the little finger. This thing has been integrated into your body, and its position is not fixed. Even if you cut off 10 fingers, it is also useless, not to mention the ring finger. Qi Xianqing said proudly. Suli was silent for a moment. Suddenly, she changed her previous anger and smiled. Master, don't you know the current situation of your apprentice? In the end, this ring will still return to your hands. Suli said and stared at Qi Xianqing's reaction. But Qi Xianqing just pulled out an unknown smile, and then his figure disappeared with the wind, leaving a sentence echoing in her ears. There is an old ancestor in the Ghost Valley, and I have helped you to get rid of him. It doesn't matter how many people you kill for the rest. As for those human clan with life rings, I have sent them to the spiritual realm. I still have something to do. When the time is right, I will meet you again. Suli's eyes flashed, and she looked up at the direction where Qi Xianqing disappeared. There was an old ancestor in the Ghost Valley? Then why didn't he have any reaction when she attacked the Ghost Valley? If the old ancestor was an ancient person, Qi Xianqing, why can you fight in the mirror without being hurt? Is it the talent of the Ghost Clan? Thinking of this, Suli frowned. A Ghost Clan that could move freely. She raised her hand and looked at the ordinary black lotus ring on the little finger. After a moment of silence, she suddenly breathed a sigh of relief, and her eyes were burning. No matter how many variables there were, her plan would continue, and no one could stop it. At lunchtime, Suli didn't see Lingli come to eat. She went to the study but didn't see him. When she was wondering, Chu Lu in maid clothes came in. After seeing Suli, Chu Lu quickly saluted. Young madam. Although her real identity was Ling Qinglan's sister, for the sake of safety, she hid her identity as a maid in the Ling mansion. Naturally, she had to abide by the rules. Suli nodded gently and asked, "Where did they go?" This servant doesn't know. Chu Shi hesitated and answered. She did accidentally hear the whereabouts of Lingli and others, but Brother Qinglan told her not to tell Suli. Suli narrowed her eyes and sat in the position where Lingli usually dealt with chores. She said, "Chu Lu, don't you think too highly of yourself to lie in front of me?" Chu Lu's identity was suddenly exposed. She stepped back in horror and panicked. You, who are you?" "It doesn't matter who I am." Suli smiled faintly and said, "The important thing is the whereabouts of Lingli and others. Tell me." "Ling Qinglan asked you to hide it because he was worried that I would act rashly. Now it's been so long. Why don't you tell me?" Chu Lu bit her lower lip and struggled in her heart. Finally, She was frightened by Su Li's exposure of her identity. She changed her mind. She knelt down and told everything she knew. Master and others have been away for more than 2 hours. I heard that they are going to a newly opened brothel in Yunjing City called Sweet Alley. Young madam, please keep it a secret for me. I just want to stay with my brother and live a peaceful life. I don't want, Chu Lu said, and suddenly felt something wrong. She looked up and saw that the chair behind the table was empty. There was no one there. Young madam left? When did she leave? Chu Lu was confused and immediately frightened. Wasn't Su Li always in the acquired 8th hurdle? Why didn't she, who was in the acquired 9th hurdle, find out how Su Li left? Is she not Su Li? Then, who is she? Chu Lu sat on the ground blankly and thought about it for a while. At this moment, in the Sweet Alley, in the spacious and bright lobby, the vermilion decoration made the ground more bright. In the center of the round carpet in the middle of the lobby, Ling Li stood silently and looked cold. Dozens of women in different clothes lay on the edge of the carpet. Looking at the position where they fell, they were all knocked out by Ling Li before they approached. A maze? Ling Li looked around and saw that the rooms on the 2nd floor were symmetrical, as if they were carved from the same mold. There were strange patterns on both sides of the stairs. Some of them were very familiar. He immediately realized that he broke into a tactical matrix. No wonder Ling Qinglan, Ling Imo, and others disappeared. Right at this moment, an extremely enchanting voice came from all directions. Ha ha ha, you deserve to be a famous figure in the martial arts circle. I really admire your temperament and determination. But, should I call you Hierarch or Third Master Ling? Before the voice died away, Ling Li suddenly became serious. Without saying anything, he turned around and stabbed to the 2nd floor with his fingers. A wisp of wind turned into a sword and pierced through the door and window. There was a muffled hum in the room, and the charming voice stopped abruptly. Ling Li succeeded in one strike, and he didn't stop. He flew up and smashed the wooden door. As the sawdust flew, an obscure figure flashed away. Although it was a glimpse, he still saw the person's face clearly. It was the lord of the Hahuan sect, Yi Tian. Ling Li didn't hit the target for the 2nd time. He walked back to the middle of the lobby and stared at the closed room upstairs. He laughed loudly and said, Lord Yi, why do you hide? Is it because your appearance doesn't match your voice? You know that you can't be seen, so you hide? Yi Tian, who was in the dark, was so gloomy. But after all, she had lived long enough, so she didn't make a sound. Ling Li, the 3rd child of the Ling mansion, was only 18 or 19 years old. His cultivation was even higher than hers. She had been pursuing the longevity realm for a lifetime, but Ling Li reached it in less than 20 years. How could she bear it? No wonder that at such a young age, he could not only control the Yinma cult, but also subdue the Tianji country and destroy many forces. This time, it was her Hahuan sect's turn. The madness in Yi Tian's eyes became more intense. The charming voice returned to normal. It was even harsher than the owl. Even Ling Qinglan and others, who were some distance away, felt a tingling in their eardrums when they heard it. Ling Li, don't be complacent. If you want to destroy my Hahuan sect, your Yinma cult is not qualified. I'd like to see how you will behave in front of it. Ha ha. When Ling Imo and Ling Qinglan heard the voice, their faces changed at the same time. They shouted, break the tactical matrix. Attack that direction with all your strength. Break the tactical matrix. All the followers of the Yinma cult heard the order and immediately began to break the tactical matrix in the direction of Ling Li. But the progress was too slow. It would take at least 1 hour to break the tactical matrix. I didn't expect that the Hahuan sect has such a high level in tactical matrix besides poison. I should have taken a tactical matrix elder with me. Ling Qinglan's face was slightly pale. Ling Imo shook his head and waved the sword in his hand to stab the same place in the tactical matrix. He said, when we came, we had killed 80% of the disciples of the Hahuan sect. But the Lord has not reached the longevity realm. I believe in the Master. Maybe when we go out, the Master has finished. Ling Qinglan also joined the team to break the tactical matrix. He sighed, I hope so. When Ling Mo and others tried their best to break the tactical matrix, the scenery around Ling Li changed greatly. The original magnificent lobby disappeared and was replaced by a barren underground plain. There was a dark pit under his feet. A long ladder extended down and almost swallowed people. Ling Li frowned. Just now, Yi Tian rushed into the pit at the risk of being hit by him. Could it be that what she said just now was not alarmist talk, and there was really a horrible existence in it? We're already here. Could it be that we're going to give up halfway and return home? Thinking of this, Ling Li smiled and stepped into the pit. His figure was slowly swallowed by the darkness and disappeared. Drip, drip, the sound of falling water echoed in the quiet cave. Ling Li walked no less than 1,000 steps. At this moment, the stone ladder under his feet was no longer dry. It was stained with a sticky substance. There was an unpleasant smell in the air. Ordinary people might vomit as long as they smelled it. I have never smelled such a smell. Ling Li covered his nose and mouth. He kept moving forward nervously. After a long time, there was a light green light in the depths of the dark cave. Exit. Ling Li was refreshed. He sped up slightly. When he reached the edge of the cave, he suddenly stopped. There was a person in the open space in front of him. To be exact, it was a mummy. He approached cautiously and suddenly realized something. He looked at the mummy, and then his pupils shrank. Yi Tian, the lord of the Haohuan sect, who had just entered the cave alive, died. His blood was sucked dry, and he didn't hear any movement. In the silence, the silent horror was spreading. Ling Li suddenly felt numb. The situation was completely beyond his imagination. He thought the it that Yi Tian mentioned was the old ancestor of the Haohuan sect. Now Yi Tian was dead. It was very likely that it, hiss. Which little guy is outside? Don't you come in and chat with me? A charming voice, like sweet honey, suddenly came from Ling Li's mind. It shocked him and made him dizzy. He walked uncontrollably to the cave. At the critical moment, Ling Li bit the tip of his tongue. The strong pain mixed with the smell of blood broke out in his mouth. Under such stimulation, he regained control of his body. You're tuning in to the Romance Rendezvous YouTube channel. We're so grateful for your support, and don't forget to subscribe to join us on this incredible journey through captivating stories. Your generosity through donations truly makes a world of difference, as it's the primary source of revenue that allows me to expand and enhance this channel for you. Thank you from the bottom of my heart for being a part of this adventure.